but we're going to continue on. We have Representative Wilcox and a few House members involved in a press conference, but we have some work that we can still do and that we don't need to take action on, and so we'll go ahead and start with that. We'll go ahead and we're going to then go to item number 6 on our agenda, which is the Criminal and Juvenile Justice Database. And we'll go ahead to Sarah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Sarah Flanagan. I'm a policy analyst for this committee with the Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel. And to set the stage for this item, I'm just going to take us through a legislative history of what brought the Criminal and Juvenile Justice Database to be. As many of you know, back in 2015, the legislature passed HB 348, which really got the Justice Reinvestment Initiative going. And a few years later, the legislature went to the Office of the Legislative Auditor General and asked them to do an evaluation of how JRI was functioning. And as part of that, the Auditor General released a couple of audits, one of them on JRI as a whole and one on information sharing in the criminal justice system. And one of their key findings was that a lack of centralized data was leaving Utah with little information on the progress that the state was making towards the goals of JRI. So, for example, the goal of reducing recidivism. There was a quote in that audit that said, "The poor condition of county jail data is perhaps one of the greatest obstacles to developing a data-driven criminal justice system." Are my slides showing? Let's see. There we go. Nope.
And then you can maybe try dragging it to.
Yeah. Sorry, everybody. We will just. Try that one more time. There we go. A few months after that audit was released, the legislature started implementing the recommendations through some legislation. The first one there, SB 159, the Law Enforcement Data Management Requirements, created a task force that started looking at these issues to determine how that data would be governed. And then the following year, HB 403 and SB 179 passed, and that put in place some of the requirements that we'll be talking about today, and also gave CCJJ some of the beginnings of the tools they needed to implement these changes. So what I have up on the screen here is a requirement that CCJJ may not award any grant of state funds for entities that are not complying with the reporting requirements. And that took effect in just earlier this year, July 1st. So we thought this was a good time for CCJJ to come back and update all of you on what the status is of those reporting requirements and how they're able to use that data. And I'm not going to spend much time on what is expected to go into that database, but I just wanted to highlight what section of code we're talking about here. There's, as you'll see, many different requirements for what goes in there, lots of different entities contributing data to this. And there's 2 slides of that, and it does, because it's the criminal and juvenile justice, it does have the R data collection on offenses committed by minors. So that's all I have, and I believe CCJJ will be talking more about the status of these.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you, Chair, committee members. My name is Tom Ross. I'm the Executive Director of the Commission on Criminal and Juvenile Justice. To my right, I have with me Chelsea Burns, who's with the Department of Technology Services, and she and others that are behind me have been really the ones doing the work on putting together this data project and program. And we're excited to be able to update you on where we are and where we're heading and be able to answer some of the questions that have been raised by the committee. I think it's important for everyone to recognize that we've been up and going as far as having funding and being able to move forward with our purchases for just a little over a year. And you'll recall in previous session discussions, both the last session and even prior to that in 2022, we talked about this project because of its size, and we're doing something that's never been done before in connecting our local disparate together to the state, and in a way that we can share data and automate that data. We knew this was going to be a project that takes some time, and the number that we talked about for those last couple of sessions have been about a 3-year process. So that's where we are at this point. I'm going to have Chelsea give you an update on what we've done, what we've been able to do in connecting, where we are in the process, and then I'm going to respond to she promoted Chelsea, not me.
Maybe. Thank you. It looks like it's going to fix here, so now I should be able to do that. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to briefly talk about the infrastructure and the data that we're collecting for this system. I think it's important to note that the infrastructure that we were asked to build. Oh, maybe I'm not talking.
Thanks.
Usually I don't have an issue with talking very loud. Most people are telling me to be quiet. Okay, so the environment itself is built. It's 100% complete at this point, pending the data providers that we connect with needing something else. So what we've done is we've created 4 different avenues for them. We have APIs, data streams. We have the secure file transfer on a server for them. If they want to do an export of a file, then we can process that. We also have transactions that are in the Utah Criminal Justice Information System, which is used by law enforcement, the courts, APMP, other correction agencies. So they have access to that system and they can input the data directly there, and it's sent to the GCP environment. The data by the statute, so in 403, there's 14 different statutes that are covered there. And right now, we are collecting 20.86%. That number is broken down by the number of files we expect to receive. So each of those statutes may have 3 files, it may have 200, depending on the number of data providers that are actually submitting the data. So we put together this graph so that we could show how many files we're receiving at this point in that system. This graph discusses the number of agencies that we've collected. We are aware of at least 439 agencies in the state of Utah that we need to collect data from individually. Some of those are going to be grouped together when we connect with their vendor system. So there's 4 different vendors in Utah. And as we connect with each of those vendors, we're actually getting the data for their customers, right? So when we connect with one of the vendors, potentially we'll get 10, 20, or 30 agencies, depending on the size of that county. For example, we are connected right now, excuse me, through Spillman to Cache County, Weber County, and Tooele County. And inside each of those counties, we're also connected to their arresting agencies. So we're getting the jail data through the vendor, and we're also getting the arresting agency's data. Right now we have 26, as I mentioned, and that number will change in the fall here as we get connected with the rest of the Spillman agencies and the other vendors that we have. Did you want to say something, Tom?
And maybe just something that I thought is very interesting. Those 3 counties, Cache, Tooele, Weber, that we've connected to, there's over 200,000 booking files that are automatically sent to us now. They're updated every 24 hours. We've never had that kind of data available to us. So you can imagine this is a lot of information we're talking about, and which is why as we talk further about this process, it will explain why some of that's difficult. But just the fact to have it automated and not have to have a request sent out, a response, somebody spend the time, is really going to be a game changer in the future for us in being able to use data for criminal justice.
And speaking of the number of files that we've received that Tom just mentioned, we have right now over 1 billion rows of data in our database. So the environment that we created is already connecting every single day and collecting this data. And with well over 1 billion rows that are easily accessed by CCJJ right now, they have access to that every single day. So they can see each day as more and more data comes in and more agencies get connected, they'll have immediate access to that data as well. I did want to just briefly take a couple of minutes to break down the number that I gave you of the total agencies, because we're not just connecting to law enforcement, we're also connecting to corrections agencies in Utah, the courts in Utah, and the prosecuting agencies. And some of those will be able to connect, as I mentioned, through a vendor, which makes one connection give us access to multiple agencies, but there are others that don't have a vendor. The prosecutors are a good example of that. So we will have to work with each of the prosecuting agencies to collect their data, and we may get it in different formats. So the infrastructure that we built was to account for those different formats that we might receive the data in.
And maybe, if Chelsea, if I could add something to that, what will make that easier to understand is, you can imagine across our state, we have a lot of prosecution that is handled outside of government entities. That they can be contracts with private attorneys. There can be an attorney that's doing multiple areas that have never been connected into a single system or sharing data. So some of these folks, they may have their own in-house computer system that they just keep their own files. So that's I would say I could see where law enforcement was in that same position a few decades back. But that's kind of where we're at, is we're going to have to be able to connect even these singular small entities at some point into our system, and that will take a little more work, to Chelsea's point, than just connecting a vendor.
And just briefly, I want to cover, I think Tom's going to cover some of this stuff for you in his discussion, but I just wanted to briefly mention a few things that we're working with, that we're facing as we approach this fall for 2023, and that's the Spillman contract. So as I mentioned, one of the vendors that we have, Spillman, we have a contract with them to purchase a tool that will help us connect to the rest of the agencies in the state. And so we are working with them directly to get that done. We hope to have that done this week so that we can get the rest of their agencies connected. The corrections group in Utah, my team has been working with them directly, and in fact built several, I think there's about 50 different APIs that we've built on behalf of them so that we could get their data. So we stepped up and said, hey, we have the time and we have the knowledge, we can help you guys, and they let us do that, which is wonderful. Because now, as of Tuesday next week, we're going to start getting corrections data. So we'll have it every single day as well. Not only will we have their data ongoing daily, but we're going to get a data dump of what they have in their systems now. So we'll have everything going back as far as their system exists, going forward for CCJJ to analyze and use that data in one place. The other thing I wanted to mention from this slide here is our connection with the courts. Right now, they are sending CCJJ an email every quarter with files attached to it. We have had discussions with them to automate that process, so to alleviate the manual process on the court side of having someone log in and export the data and attach it to an email and send it to CCJJ, and also on CCJJ's side for having to manually go through some PDFs and take the data out of that and copy and paste it into another environment. We right now are getting an automated export of their file, but they had some personnel changes. So we're going to work with the new group to hopefully push that even one step further and automate the data coming directly from system to system so that we don't have to go through that export and import process.
One of the questions that we were asked to report on is how many entities are out of compliance with the reporting requirements. And I think it's important for everyone to understand there's kind of two worlds of data right now that we're dealing with. For those that we've connected, their world's easy right now. It's happening automatically. They're not having to do anything as an agency to provide us this information. for those that we haven't connected, and it's us reaching out to them because we have contracts we have to put together. Obviously we have to connect them in, almost agency by agency. They're still doing things in the same world that we've been working in for the past few years. So every agency is providing us data. That's what we can say. And so in our minds and our feelings, everyone is in compliance with what they can do currently. What will be the key part is once we connect everyone, or if, for example, someone refuses to be connected, I guess that would be a much more telling sign. No one has indicated that to us. We're still going down a very positive path that we believe and intend to connect all criminal justice players into our system. That may change at some point, but then we will know, and then we will be able to be more definitive. But my conversations and my understanding, talking with many of these leaders in these different arenas, everyone gets it, and they want to be able to have more data available. Yes, there are concerns, and I think we'll talk before we end out here a little bit about really what the partnership has been to build this, to get to this point. But for now, everyone is giving us what they either have been giving us, or if we've connected them, we're getting new, robust, exciting data that's going to change things significantly going forward. The agencies that receive state grant funding, which you'll recall was part of a attached to HB 403, that if an agency is not in compliance, they could lose grant funding. And at this point, as I just mentioned, we feel, and we've talked with Representative Wilcox and others that have been involved. This process, by the way, we have a working task force, a legislative task force that has Senator Andreg, Representative Wilcox, Representative Lisenby, that have been a part of this and have been meeting with us since the last session. And so they've been able to give input from the legislative perspective. They're also doing what all of you are wanting to do. They're holding our feet to the fire, because what they don't want is for things to slack or lose momentum. And I appreciate that, because that keeps us focused. It keeps us moving forward. Our team has been phenomenal, and I think that the collaboration has been great, but we know there'll be hurdles and bumps. And we're going to try to do this in that same partnership that we really started this whole product. So the other thing that I think would be helpful for you is there's only a limited number of reports that law enforcement provides to CCJJ. And those reports are not currently, with the exception of the jail data that we receive, that's very robust. And of course, now the agencies that are connected in, extremely robust. For outside of that, they've been doing these reports in a state system, a state information sharing system. What we have done is made no sense to put a bunch of time and money into upgrading that when we're going to move it all over to this. But we have changed the back end. So the ability for my researchers and report data analysts to be able to do their jobs has already improved, because DTS and again, this is a partnership with CCJJ, DTS, and DPS. We've been able to make changes that are enhancing that, but it didn't cost money, and it was something that we could do while we were getting these contracts done. So we have not. We feel that everyone is in compliance, at least at the levels that they've been in up to this date, and we feel confident that that's going to change significantly over the next year or two. Some of the barriers and challenges. The one thing that Utah's doing that's different, that could be really changing the platform when this is going to work, when this works out, is there is no state that I'm aware of that currently has connectivity to automate data between every criminal justice entity in that state, local and state government. Now, there are states that have gone down the path of forcing everyone to try to go to one platform, but that's not the criminal justice system as a whole. We're talking courts, corrections, we're talking prosecutors, all of these. Utah has an opportunity to potentially be the first state to accomplish this. So it's big in the sense of that we're doing it all across the board. It's difficult because we recognized early, based on many years of discussions, that trying to force everyone to one platform was not going to work. It's failed in the past. Now, it doesn't mean a county can't go, and we've seen that across our state. Multiple counties have gone to one platform. But to tell everyone it's one platform, that doesn't work well. Our local governments like to have choice. And there's an argument for competition and innovation that would say that's not a bad thing to have choice and cost in making sure that we're doing the right things. So because of that, we are connecting disparate systems into one big data platform, the Google Cloud. The technology's there to do it. It will require us to work through some of the bumps because data is only as good as the data that's understood coming across. You can have all kinds of raw data. And if we don't have people looking at that, understanding the process the agency used to put the data in, how they count that data, if we don't understand those things, then we won't be able to make sense of what that data is intended really to provide us in our reporting to you, in our reporting to the state, and being able to give reliable information on criminal justice. So that's the challenge. And we're going down that path, hoping to do that with various different vendors and records management systems. The lack of standardization complicates the data transfer process. I talked about that. To some extent, we'll be building a kind of a library of codes that we have to make sure, our analysts have to make sure that the code in Spillman's the same, it's meaning the same thing in Versiterm, eForce, Tyler, any of these other systems. That takes time and effort. And then making sure that raw data is in a usable platform or information. So there's a lot of work that's going on behind the scenes, and there's going to be a lot of work going on in the front end as we get this replicator tool contract finished. We've been working on right after the session ended and we started working on this. This is amazing. Spillman represents 80% roughly maybe of the agencies in our state as the records management system. And in working with them, they've been able to develop a tool that we will be able to purchase with the funding that you provided. It's minimal. We're talking $300,000 or less. That they can connect with anybody they want to share data with, and we've provided it for them. And they can share with us without us having to go in and build it for Bountiful and Cache and Layton and Salt Lake. We just have to, that replicator tool, we're buying it for all of them. And we'll just have to go in and connect it. Once it's connected, we've already tested it. So that's pretty amazing that we didn't know that when this conversation started, really 2 years ago. And it was exciting for us to see that that's possible now. And we believe that contract's been approved by purchasing at the state. Now they're looking at it at Spillman, and our hope is that we'll be ready to sign something and move that forward. So exciting times, new technology, a new level of cooperation and collaboration.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple of questions. Representative Burton.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to say thank you to everybody who's involved in this. This is monumental for law enforcement, and having been involved in something like this at the federal level, trying to get everybody on the same system was a nightmare. And with advancements in programming and software, it's amazing what we can do. But the question I had is, we all know that agencies use different language to code crime. And so is this being done automatically when you receive these files from outside agencies, or do analysts have to kind of look at this and fit it into a code? Is this being done by humans, or is it being done in an automatic fashion, automated? Does that make sense, that question?
It makes sense. You might be the better one to respond to that, Chelsea.
Yeah, so what we're going to try to do is we're going to start with the manual piece, and we're going to teach our system to do it automatically, right? So with AI and all of the new technologies that we have access to, that's what we want to do long term, is so humans don't have to maintain this. But the first step is gathering the data from each of the agencies so we can see what we're actually dealing with. And right now we have the Utah State Gov codes that come right on the state level. But each agency and county, each city and county have their own. So what we're hoping to do is once we get all of that data collected, we can see the similarities that we can automatically, and then some of them, unfortunately, will have to initially be manually looked at. But we can teach the system as we go so that we don't have to review those over and over again each year when new statutes come out.
Okay, this is exciting. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Reby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is really exciting. I know Senator Grover and I are on education, and in education, we actually have all of our schools connected and all of our students connected, and it really does help us figure out where our kids are going. My concern is when you talked about certain agencies that really aren't connected to this, and you have to reach out and ask them for that information. How many data points are you asking them for, and does that group of people represent a certain demographic that is unique to that group of people? Does that make sense? You know, because probably like somebody who's hiring someone personal is a different demographic, and would that change the outcome of your research? And my final question is, can you give us an example of how this data has been used to make a betterment so that we can have a tangible thing to be excited about?
I can probably help with at least some of this. So keep in mind that at this stage, and maybe for the coming years, I guess we'll see, this is aggregate data we're talking. We're not talking about personally identifiable data. That's important.
Yep.
So it's less about an individual and what changes or what even happens. The system can be updated as those change. We do that now at the federal level. It just takes longer. So to that point, we feel, to me, it was always a numbers game. If the data that we're collecting represents, let's just say, for example, 80% or more of our state, and in that 80% it has small, rural, medium, large, I think that's data that most of us would feel is usable and is good. It'd be great to have higher, but at least it's something that we can have some confidence in. When that data hits a lower number, 50%, 40%, it's not as meaningful. And I think what's been happening over the years with, you've passed legislation that requires data. There's been barriers to getting the data. It's been in such small numbers at times, not everything, but in a lot of it, especially where someone has to sit in front of a computer and query for hours, that at the end of the day, the data doesn't mean enough to any of us, and it's open for interpretation or attack. So our hope is that we can move the criminal justice system in a way together in partnership that this means something, and it actually, has sufficient data that we can rely on that. It's probably worth saying now, and I'll keep saying it over and over again because this is one of the concerns. There's a trust factor with sharing data. I think everyone gets that. And I would argue that in my career, as I've watched it evolve in local jurisdictions to counties and beyond, the trust piece was the bigger barrier. We're doing something now where there isn't full trust always on both sides. So this isn't about, even though we're getting quite a bit of data sent into us, it's not that we're just going to be going into this data on any whim or any question anyone wants to raise, and we're going to go in and research it. There has to be a partnership relation. We have to have the conversations. First off, we need to find out if it's even being done in the same way in our state. That might be something this process helps improve. I believe it will. And then there has to be some agreement. I don't think it's as simple as just calling up CCJJ and saying, hey, run a query on this. But in the same time, it allows us to use this data for research that has to still meet very strict criteria. But I think it will evolve over time as that trust grows. But we've committed to all the partners involved that we're going to be talking about the items or issues or the data points that people want collected. We're going to be having those conversations in our working groups. We have to.
Can I clarify my question? So you said 80% of the people are involved. So when you look at the 20% that are not being captured, or is that 20% the same sample size as the 80%, or is it 20% a whole unique population? So that's my question.
It's not unique. So
Okay.
the 80% that he's talking about are the coverage of the state that's under Spillman specifically. So the other 20% are using other vendors. And he mentioned
So are those other, so when you took it though 20%, are they unique population that is using this other type of vendor that would cause us not to see the full spectrum of the services? Does that make
it's different enough. Yes, Salt Lake
Okay.
County is one of them, and that's maybe that will help you. Salt Lake County uses Versaterm,
Yeah.
and what exists in Salt Lake County is significant. So those numbers won't show in that data until we get connected to Versaterm. So it is, I think, at least for Salt Lake Valley, it's significant.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, thanks, Chelsea, for
Yeah, of course.
clarifying that.
And one tangible success.
So
that-
one thing,
yeah.
actually, you might have one, but one thing that I wanted to mention that I thought of for this, that's tangible up to this point. I don't believe anything has officially been done yet because they're reviewing the data, but CCJJ now has access to the data real time. So they can start doing their reports and their analysis right now instead of waiting several months after contacting agencies to go through that data, right? And in many cases, as I mentioned, they were getting PDFs where they'd have to copy and paste that into Excel or some other platform that they could use the data. Now they don't have to. It's in a database. They can run queries. They can transform it if they need to, change dates, things like that, to get the data, and they can do it in real time.
And I'll add, this may sound a little bit weird, but I think you'll appreciate it. My data folks who have been stuck with having to do these processes for years, very frustrated at times, feeling like, everyone wants the world, you can't provide it, and no one understands what you do. They are excited. I mean, it has changed their complete perspective in the value of what they're bringing to us. They want to bring forward reports that help you and that are meaningful, that help our state. And when they can't, they get frustrated and feel like they're, kind of the outcast. That's why we have these, punishments built in, is because, people don't provide it, but they feel like that's on them too. Mm-hmm. They are excited. I have not seen that since over this past 6-7 months as we've rolled this out. It's changed really how they feel about their role. And that's important, I believe.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I don't see any other questions or comments. Thank you so much.
Just one last thing to mention on the juvenile justice side. As has been mentioned, there is also a juvenile database. That database has existed before starting this project, and the reason that's so is it's obvious. There's two entities that are part of that database, and just for so that you're aware of it, it's a court and agency records exchange system, the CARE system, and has the courts, juvenile court, and the juvenile justice youth services automated connected in. They're sharing data back and forth all the time. And that's significant because they're the two primary organizations that deal with our youth once they're charged or once they're being managed or dealt with in our criminal justice system. They're also working, to your point, Representative, with with the Board of Education. We're trying to connect in their data. So HB 304 that passed this last session is requiring specific juvenile data that can be provided. Quite a bit of that is available to us now. Once we get the school board piece connected in, I think that will help finish that. So that is happening at the same time, and I think that's exciting as well, going forward. But I think, chairs, that's really our presentation. We're happy to answer any questions or anything additional that comes forward.
Okay, I don't see anything else. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll turn the gavel back over to Chair Wilcox.
Thank you, Senator Grover. I appreciate your patience with our change in schedule today. We have, I believe, Commissioner Anderson, thanks, made it back over. Great, we'll go ahead and move him, but thank you, Tom, for all your work on data management. It is quite the daunting task, and we appreciate it. Thank you. So we have item number 2 on the agenda as it's listed, Public Safety Workforce. There'll be an update on our Mental Health for First Responders project on 23, HB 59, and then we'll invite Salt Lake City Police Department. I'm not sure exactly who they're going to have, if it's Chief Brown or somebody else that'll be coming up to speak with us as well. And then Fraternal Order of Police and Brent and Scott. I saw both of you there. There you go. and we'll have a little bit of discussion there. Go ahead, Commissioner Anderson.
Great. Well, good morning, or good afternoon, I should say. Committee, thank you for having us. My name is Jess Anderson. I serve as the Commissioner of Utah Department of Public Safety. Great to be with you. I have a PowerPoint presentation if that can be brought up. While they're bringing that up, as we deal with on respect to the mental health grant situation, I can just tell you that we have been, since the implementation of this and those grant dollars given to DPS to see as the overseer of that grant and be able to push this out to entities, we have taken a proactive approach at this and doing as much as we can. What the grant is and what the grant overall was is the fact of giving resources to first responders for their mental health treatment. And so in the meantime of receiving that bill, we've written the rule that goes along with that, administrative rule for implementation. And so methods of notification, you'll see there on the slide now that it's up, but different aspects of this. And so within our own agency, within DPS, we've just relied upon our own staff to be the staffing for this. And so with current resources that we currently had. With that though, many efforts of sending emails and a lot of push notifications as far as to the chiefs, the sheriffs, the fire chiefs, EMS personnel. Also utilizing the League of Cities and Towns as well as UAC, trying to get that word out to all entities of who this was available to. I can tell you that effectiveness is you never know the measurement of that for sure, but as we've seen some of these applications come in and probably more to do, but yet still fairly effective. Other methods of notification is we have that application information on our DPS website, easy to access and to figure out more about and read about. We have several businesses that have heard about this grant as well who began right away reaching out to entities within their communities or across the state, notifying them as well that this was available. And of course, direct communication and then follow-up communication regarding any additional clarification that was needed or has been needed. If you go to the next slide. Accessibility into some of the things we've tried to do is make this very accessible. And so every which way we created a very easy application process that's an easy fillable form. So it was meant to be easy fillable form to send that back in with the rules of what was expected. I can tell you that there's been a lot of time given to our staff to provide clarification or follow-up clarification for many of these applications. And of course, understand and recognize that a lot of the agencies we're dealing with now, of course, don't have an expert in-house. And so that's really what we are up against is trying to walk a lot of these agencies, first responding agencies, through what this might look like for them. A lot of small agencies, of course, that don't have the resources to devote to the mental health side of this. And so there again, a lot of follow-up from our team, being able to help give ideas, suggestions, and where to turn to for starting this application or what they might be asking for. And then some of the limitations, it is what we've gone through as a committee. We've created a committee by a statute and have of us that sit on that committee to push out these grant funds. And there's a little bit of, I guess, it's not quite as clear as what could be or can be, that we've had to make some of those judgments based upon what our understanding of the statute is, as well as in the rule. So we've tried to stay with that, though. I can tell you that we've tried to stay as consistent as possible with what we're pushing this money out for. So if you go to the next, there you go. Just to give you some measurements here. So throughout this entire application process, we have received 124 applications, and several of these applications are multiple agencies applying together. So you will have counties, especially in some of the smaller and more rural parts of the state, who are combining perhaps their entire county, recognizing the effects of fire, medical, and police all into what that may be. We have, as we've pushed that out, and we've had a total of 6 denials that we've turned down, and 2 of those requests for equipment that we didn't see as mental health need, exercise equipment, and building out gyms. But also then we've had some from businesses, 4 of those from businesses that are trying to apply for that, which do not qualify.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So a total of the funding that we've had is $3.6 million that we have pushed out year to date in these grants. Now, part of this effort, understand that the accountability piece of these agencies is a quarterly report. And so a quarterly report, which is due back to us again at DPS, to track how that funding is being implemented, or otherwise the progression and progress that they're making with that funding. One of the areas that we are neglecting as an agency is simply the ability to follow up and or otherwise continually remind or at least have somebody oversee that program as a full-time duty. And so because I say that because year to date we've also $3.6 million that we started awarding right away. We've received a total of 6 reports, quarterly reports from 6 agencies that have followed that through. And therefore, and there again, it's just a simple fillable form that we've made available to them. They just have to fill it out and send it back to us or push send. So with that, one of the areas that we've identified and talking to Representative Wilcox offline, but it was also the fact that we just probably we need somebody within our department that can pay full-time attention to this particular grant. And so I will happy to report that we're in the process of hiring within DPS a full-time position that will be the overseer of this grant that can also pay that strict attention to it, but also take that word far and wide to be out in the state and evaluate the resources that are available, but also making sure that chiefs, sheriffs, EMS providers, dispatch, victim advocates, everybody who qualified for this grant are aware of it and taking advantage of that startup money. And if you want to go to the next, this shows you kind of what we're seeing as far as agency representation, where we have of 185, so of 124 applications, 185 actual agencies, where 62 are urban, and you see that the 33% versus the 65% are coming from rural outlying areas of the state that are taking advantage of the grant. And now within the grant there was language even within the bill that preference would be given to certain classification of county or city. I can tell you because of the funding that we do have and that we're still sitting on, we've actually been able to fund every single application that has come in, no matter the class of county or city. And so some who are have really been able to expand their program or start up in certain areas of their program that was well needed. But that is reflective of everything you see here as far as the 2/3 of those that are coming from rural settings within the state. If you go to the next slide, you see the 89 police, 67 fire, 14 EMS, and then 15 other agencies that represent dispatch, search and rescue, or victim advocates. Or in that like. And Mr. Chair, that concludes my presentation, and open to any questions.
Thank you. We appreciate your being here today, and we have you here for a couple of different things. rather anxious to hear about progress on the on hire and what that's going to look like. For the committee's information, one of the things that we've struggled with is sort of just getting that water to the end of the row with all these agencies, especially the smaller volunteer fire departments, that kind of stuff. Rural Utah has been much more difficult. And that's where we came to the conclusion that we needed to have somebody that literally showed up on the front door, that could walk into a chief's office, say, this is how you do it. We're going to make sure that you guys have it, because we're still getting those phone calls. We're still getting those emails that are somewhat heartbreaking in nature, right? That I've asked for it. Nobody knows what I'm talking about. I know I need it. And hasn't this been the law for like over a year now? I'm like, yeah, it has. So I appreciate Commissioner being willing to do that, to look at it from a different angle, and to take that, straight there to the end of the row. So we're excited about that project. We still there are ongoing issues as we go through this process of identifying the proper therapists that we need and the numbers that we need. And so you're going to see some different projects there, and I hope to get a report back from our system of higher ed on how that scholarship program is doing that I can give to you next month, hopefully when we're in St. George. Are there any other questions? It looks like I have Senator Reeby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
So my concern is pretty much what Representative Wilcox was talking about. If you have a smaller agency, sometimes it is really hard to fill out these grants. Can we connect people with those smaller agencies to another smaller agency and have like an economy of scale with smaller groups coming together? And then also, what kind of, are we talking about telehealth as well as telemental health, so that we can connect people with other areas, not just other agencies, but other areas that might have more robust services where they can start reaching out to smaller communities?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. So in short, the answer is yes.
Okay.
We've seen all of that. So connecting smaller agencies to others who are joined up to work on this together, or seeking that help as far as some of the just resources it takes. Yes, and so we've done that. We've also made it ourselves available to be that help, to be able to get these things filled out, or at least know where to go for what am I looking for. So we'll continue to build upon that, especially as we feel this assignment in this position that we see as a need for this now that where we're at. On the other piece of it, what we are seeing is a lot of what you just described, a lot of telehealth applications, people who can in rural settings who can dial in right away and receive somebody, right? So a lot of that is a startup to also other. We're seeing a lot of in-person, that are mandatory in-person annual visits that are being requested as the startup of their agency to do those visits. And those will be more or less in person. They've identified some vendors and some professionals who are close to the area they want to utilize their help. So yes, we're seeing kind of across the board a little bit of everything.
Thank you for your great work on this.
Thank you, Senator. And I don't see any other further questions. I just want to mention, long term, we're talking about building out a much wider network than what we have, right? And Representative Hollins is well aware of how difficult that can be in this space. It's when I say long term, this is like decade territory, right? It's not just getting scholarships and stuff. It's recruiting. It's some cases it's dealing with our retirement issues, frankly, and looking at that differently than what we have in the past. And that can be one of the most difficult things that the legislature looks at, especially in the other house that I don't serve in. So, sorry, good to see you. Good to see you. But anyway, we do appreciate all the work and thought that's gone into this. But this is going to be, even the Safety T Frontline, right, is going to be a part of this as we build out that larger network. It's one thing to deal with the emergency right in front of you. It's another thing for ongoing health and wellness for our first responders. So thank you to each of you that have invested here. We'll go ahead and move to the next item on this part of the agenda, and that's the Salt Lake City Police Department. So we'll invite you up here. We've had, I'll do just a quick intro on the way up. We've had sort of a difficult situation where I've had more officers from this department reach out to me than at any one point in this role in the last month, as the peer support program has gone through some challenges. So we've invited the chief to be here to talk about that. Appreciate Chief Brown. I know it's a busy week with lots of other things going on, and we've had some very good, frank conversations. So give him a chance to talk about that project. But more than anything else, we want to make sure that those who are listening, and I know I've got lots of folks here that are listening that are not in the room here. I want them to listen very closely at what those resources are right now and how we're able to deliver those. So, Chief, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, Committee, it's an honor to be here with you this afternoon to discuss the critical importance of an employee wellness, particularly in law enforcement. The stress faced by our dedicated employees cannot be overstated, and we firmly believe supporting them is a collective responsibility. I'd like to provide an overview of our employee wellness program, support program. For more than 2 decades, Salt Lake City has had a wellness and support program. Our department will continue to be an example to other police departments throughout the country as we rebuild our program. After becoming aware of a serious and critical issue, we made the difficult decision in early July to temporarily suspend the program. This gave us time to determine the scope of the issue at hand, and our review into that matter is ongoing. While you may have been told that the suspension resulted from a minor issue, I can assure you the specific reason for this suspension was not minor and is the subject of an investigation involving serious allegations. Since July, we have been working with multiple stakeholders, including current peer support members, the Major City Chiefs Association, and other stakeholders, including our own employees, to rebuild our policies and procedures. I am fully aware that our recent decision to suspend the employee wellness and support program had an impact on our employees. Mental health resources are crucial for the overall health of our department and our employees. Although the program is suspended, we have implemented emergency contingency plans and procedures to ensure that we are still meeting state law. Employees of the Salt Lake City Police Department still have access to mental health resources. We have contracted with a licensed health care provider who specializes in providing mental health treatment and care. We have coordinated with the peer support team from the Salt Lake City Fire Department to provide critical incident debriefs if necessary. We have a robust employee assistance program through the city and the Midtown Clinic. When additional mental health care resources are needed, employees still have access to our department's chaplains. These resources, individually and combined, provide a wide range of mental health care modalities for our employees. We are confident the resources we have in place provide the necessary support during this time of rebuilding and that they meet the requirements of the law. I should also point out, for the record, that when we suspended our employee wellness and support program, the Fraternal Order of Police and current members of the program reached out and provided even more resources for our department employees. Today, our employee wellness program is comprised of 53 employees. We have sworn members and professional staff who do this work in addition to their primary responsibilities within our department. Of the 53 employees, that includes 2 full-time peer support facilitators and a full-time mental health clinician. We have created 7 teams consisting of 4 to 5 members who each can provide mental health resources and referrals to other employees. Committee members, it has been requested that we provide a snapshot of some of the data we have. In May of 2023, our peer support program had 90 contacts with employees, and our mental health clinician had 46 office visits. April, our peer support program had 42 contacts with employees, and our clinician had 25 office visits. In March of this year, our peer support program had 90 employee contacts, and our clinician had 19 office visits. As the Chief of Police, my top priority will always be the safety and well-being of every employee. We are on a rapid plan to reinstate the program, but it is crucial to proceed thoughtfully and involve the necessary stakeholders in an effort to create the most effective support system available. In addition to discussions with stakeholders, our rebuilding will include updates to policies, procedures, and enhanced training. We have discovered that our peer support members have had various and differing interpretations of the exceptions to the confidentiality provisions outlined in state code. We are working to clarify this in our policy to ensure all employees who seek peer support are treated appropriately and equally. We are a dynamic police department. We have always pivoted to make changes to improve our services, whether they are directed to our community or our employees. Our public safety responders are not just employees. They are vital pillars of our community. Their mental health and physical health plays a significant role in their ability to effectively serve and protect. I am proud to represent the Salt Lake City Police Department, an organization like no other that is committed to achieving excellence while prioritizing the well-being of its dedicated personnel. With that, I'd be open to any questions you may have, and I would like to introduce, this is Lieutenant Andrew Clough. He is the peer support coordinator for the department and also the XO for the chief's office. So thank you.
Thank you, Chief. We appreciate you coming in today to talk about it. Again, we'll follow up with the FOP immediately after this, but we know this has been a difficult time for your department, and we appreciate your commitment to making sure that everyone has the resources they need.
Thank you.
I don't see any further questions right now from the rest of the committee, so we'll go ahead and move on to the next part of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Looks like we have Kevin on the internet.
Chair, I don't believe we're going to need Kevin Murray for this presentation.
Okay. Go ahead and introduce yourselves. Tell us who you represent, even though most of us know you.
My name is Scott Stevenson. I'm the Executive Director of the Fraternal Order of Police, the State Lodge. And
I'm Brent Jex. I'm the President for the State Fraternal Order of Police. And as you said, Kevin Murray, who's the President of our Capital City Lodge, is on via Zoom. He's at a conference right now.
Okay.
We're kind of in a unique situation here. We don't qualify as a first responder, so we don't receive any monies from this grant. But we wanted to get in front of you and really express, one, the appreciation for our law enforcement leaders and taking care of our officers, but most importantly, what we've been doing since 2015. And that is we've had a mental health program since then because we recognize the need of what our officers were going through. So I applaud the efforts of this body to give us money to help alleviate some of the strain on FOP resources, because our program was funded on the backs of officers with their dues. With that, I don't have much to add other than, we appreciate the efforts and attention put on to mental health. And we're open to any questions you may have.
I think the primary question, and I have one here from Representative Burton, so I'll go to him too. The primary question for me is, we want to make very clear for those that are listening how they can access these resources in the, with what's gone on with Salt Lake. So how do they access your program?
Mm-hmm.
How do they access the program in Salt Lake PD?
For us, we have a cadre of vetted therapists that are culturally competent to the needs of officers.
Mm-hmm.
And they have been vetted by our program under our Wellness Foundation. And how they access that, they go to the therapist that's on the list, or even a therapist of their choice, and they submit a bill without question. We provide up to 4 visits that we cover, and I think 2 visits for their family members. We tried to streamline it as much as possible and allowing them to maintain some anonymity, because there was always that concern about keeping administration out of the way of them getting their mental health. Again, there's a trust issue that was mentioned earlier in Director Ross's comments. That is very true, but we have not come across that problem yet.
And also, if I may, in relation to the with Salt Lake City, one of the things that we did is we reached out to each of our 18 vetted providers and just explained to them that there would be a need, and asked them if any Salt Lake City officers came in, if they would find room early on in their schedules that they receive prioritization while things are sorting themselves out with Salt Lake City.
I think, I'm sure you have a website and they mostly know how to get a hold of you. When you talk about the trust deficit, I think that's been reiterated over and over again in the different phone calls that I've received. Right? It's just sort of a natural thing anyway. It's a cultural thing. It's not unique to Salt Lake PD by any means. But in particular, when it comes to this topic, right? They don't want to walk past the chief's office to ask for help. They don't want to be on their record somehow or hurt. They feel like it's a liability.
Sure.
So I want to make sure that those that are hearing us understand, and maybe you can talk about it where you're studying that right now a little bit, but what that confidentiality should look like, what it looks like in practice. Obviously, that was one of the concerns that led to the suspension of the program in Salt Lake. But why don't you tell us a little bit, Scott, with your experience, what to expect?
Yeah, and Representative Hollins can probably chime in regarding confidentiality. Yeah. But what that essentially means is that it's what you say to your counselor stays with that counselor, unless there's being a mandatory reporter, meaning if you report any violation of law, there's a very small exceptions to that confidentiality, and so it's important for officers to understand that it's really a limited window in which a counselor would be required to divulge what is told to them.
And how is that different from a counselor, from a therapist, a clinician, a conversation with a clinician, and a conversation with peer support?
It's one and the same, because peer support under that law provided some confidentiality privileges. So that peer support officer cannot be required to divulge what that officer tells them.
Well, just certainly limited exceptions.
There's always going to be an exception, yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, it makes me a little bit nervous, right, when we treat peer support the same way we would treat a clinician, because they're not. Right. They're volunteers, they're officers, but that shouldn't be the exact same relationship. They're just not a clinician. And
I'm not a legal, but there could be some subtle differences. But when we worked on that law several years ago, that was the goal.
Part of the intent.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I understand that. Representative, you did not have your light on. You just thought you might. Okay. I looked down. All right, Representative Burton.
All right, thanks, Mr. Chair. When I joined the Army in 1982, I was told by the Army if they'd wanted me to have a family, they would have issued me one. I think we're light years ahead of that, and I'm grateful for that. And so my question to you, Major Stevenson, is from, you don't want me to call you that, I know. Thanks for your service.
I love the title.
Yeah, you've been awesome at Post. But from your perspective, how is this program working with family members? Because, officers can't be healthy without healthy family members. So is it being used, and is there any trepidation from your perspective on them using it?
It's being used, but I think underutilized. I don't think people realize when they actually are crying for help, especially when it's a family member of an officer. But it is being used, and we try to streamline that process as well. And keep in mind, for a long time, we covered officers whether they were a member or not, which is pretty substantial and shows where our priorities are. So, as of late, we've changed our position just because of the limited resources. Again, this money is being coming from the dues of our officers. So, yeah, we've had to adjust.
Well, thank you for that. To that point, we can't tell you how much we appreciate that you've done that, right, as a matter of policy. You've been very aggressive in the space in helping to develop the right policies for your officers. That is a responsibility of the state. It's a responsibility of the cities. It's a responsibility of each of us that are asking you to do what you do. And for you to step up and fill that gap when we need it is invaluable to us. So thank you both.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Okay. We'll go ahead. Any further discussion from the committee on this one? Okay. Thank you. We'll go ahead and move to the next item on the agenda. This is on implementation of HB 461. This is a bill that we passed this last session here, dealing with firearm possession and its interaction with airports. We've got, we're going to ask our counsel, Jackie Rogers, who's back. Okay. I saw you walk out earlier and it made me a little bit nervous, Jackie. She's gonna do a brief presentation summary of where we're at with the bill, and of course we also have the sponsor of the bill, Representative Grecius, is here, and she's willing to able to answer any questions as well. In fact, Representative Grecius, if you would come up and take a seat there next to Representative Ballard. This does not make her a member of our committee, but it does allow us to use her like one for the purposes of this discussion. Okay. Oh yeah, I do need to turn your mic on. Thank you. See, I have a big job here. Yeah. There you go, Jackie. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jackie Rogers. I'm an Associate General Counsel from the Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel. We're the nonpartisan office that works on the bills with the sponsors. And I was the drafter of last session's HB 461, which was Representative Grecius's bill. And I'm just going to do a quick overview of what the bill did. And here we go. Okay. This is I'm thinking one of the key parts of the bill that we wanted to discuss today. So it is, let's see how I move this. Okay. Within a secure area of an airport, a person, including a person's license to carry a concealed firearm, is guilty of a Class A misdemeanor if they knowingly or unintentionally possess any dangerous weapon or firearm, and an infraction if the person recklessly possesses any dangerous weapon or firearm. And so what Representative Grecius's bill did was take out the criminal negligence. It used to be an infraction if you had your firearm with criminal negligence. And then this is also from the bill, and these refer to the asset forfeiture sections of the code. So if you're prosecuted under this section, your firearm will be returned to you if you're able to lawfully possess a firearm, and then if your firearm is seized under the section, it's not subject to the forfeiture parts of the code. If lawfully may possess the firearm, and then in a prosecution brought under the section, a prosecutor may not condition a plea on the forfeiture of a firearm. This goes to the part of the bill that left in recklessly but took out with criminal negligence, and so I thought it would be helpful to show you the general code that applies to all criminal statutes. So recklessly means that you're aware of but consciously disregard a substantial and unjustifiable risk that the circumstances exist or the result will occur. The risk must be of such a nature and degree that its disregard constitutes a gross deviation from the standard of care that an ordinary person would exercise under all the circumstances as viewed from the actor's standpoint. And then criminal negligence, instead of saying is aware of but consciously disregard, it says when he ought to be aware. And then all the rest of the language is the same, of a substantial and justifiable risk that the circumstances exist or the result will occur. And those definitions are very close but different. And so I pulled the model Utah jury instruction because you would guess juries would say, what's the difference? So this is what they read to juries in this case. The concepts of recklessness and criminal negligence are similar in that both require the presence of a substantial and unjustifiable risk. They differ in that it is reckless to act if one is aware of the risk, while it is criminally negligent to act if one should be aware of the risk. In either event, the behavior must be a gross deviation from what an ordinary person would do under the circumstances. So that goes to the parts of the bill, like the general overview of the bill. And then I understand there's some other people going to speak to the rest of the bill or other questions on.
I think what I'll do is I'll ask Representative Grecius. So that's the legal aspect. Man, if I can hit the button. There we go. Your light on there?
Yeah.
Okay. Ask you if you want to summarize maybe some of the intent of the bill, what we believe we were passing, that kind of stuff.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the intent of this bill was to decriminalize our true accidents. We're a very, very pro Second Amendment state. We have constitutional carry, concealed carry, all of the above. And for some people, firearms are just part of their daily lives. So what we've seen happening is someone will have it in a bag, they forget it's there, they grab their gym bag, forget they have something in there, and then they'll take that into a TSA checkpoint unaware that they have it with them. So the intent of this bill was to decriminalize those accidents, give the person the right to go put that back in their car and try again, similar to what we would do with pocket knives or any other sort of contraband. They can throw it in the garbage if they want. They can give it to TSA just like they do a bottle of lotion, or they can go put that back in their car. It did allow, if there was something higher, for law enforcement to still seize it if they need that as part of their investigation. So we did leave that possibility in there, but prohibited a prosecutor from seeking forfeiture as part of a plea in abeyance, which was being done automatically in all cases. So why we are here today is I had an officer reach out to me informing me that since we took negligence out of the criminal code, the airport division has been ordered to cite all cases as reckless, regardless of if they meet the legal standard of reckless or not. And as Jackie pointed out, that is a very fine line, so we can hash out those details down the road. We had an officer who refused and said, I don't have probable cause for this seizure. This was negligence. Therefore, there is no crime committed. I cannot seize this firearm. Command said, do it anyway. He said no. Command, since according to the statement I received from the officer, Command then went in, modified that report, changed the firearm to seized, and that officer was put on administrative leave. So that hearing has occurred. I'm not aware of the outcome. Since then, I've received statements from 9 different officers about what's going on. They're all very similar in the fact that they're being ordered to cite all cases as reckless. There's a couple different reasons that have been floated for that, including operationally. Some have said, well, it's faster. If we just issue them a citation, we can get them on their flight faster. So for me, it's a natural consequences versus government consequences. Is a government consequence really better for you than a natural consequence? And that's another conversation that we can have as part of it. But the bottom line is we have officers facing termination for following what this legislature passed. And that is concerning to me. So was there anything else? I know, Chair,
No, that was a good summary.
Great, thank you.
Looks like I have a question from Senator Ibsen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And she may have already answered that, but where does state statute fit with the national law or federal law where there are federal officers at the airport? Is this in conflict?
May I answer that?
Yeah.
I wish you would. That's
I haven't done this like extra committee.
No, it's okay.
thing.
It's basically the exact same, so everybody understands.
Great.
It's the exact same if I had to put her there. I just know we're going to have a bunch of other people up, and this is going to function easier. So
Great.
she's
Sounds
in that
great.
chair.
So it doesn't do anything with the federal requirements. So TSA, even though we decriminalize negligence, they'll still hit you with approximately $3,000 to $5,000 fine for a first offense. They will plead that down. I did have someone reach out to me who had pled theirs down to $1,500. So there's still absolutely a deterrent to the behavior, and there is still a federal penalty associated. The state is just no longer tagging on to that federal penalty for accidentals.
Okay, and then Jackie,
I caught myself several times almost doing, I leave here and find myself going to the airport with things I shouldn't have. And so
it happens.
Yeah.
And then Jackie, if there's any of these legal answers that you would like to provide, is there anything you'd like to add to that one? You good?
No.
Okay. Great. Awesome. I'm just saying our feelings won't be hurt if you chime in and help us. Yeah. Okay.
I will say they let me mail my knife home once, though.
Yeah, that's nice of them. All right, Representative Stoddard, it looks like you have a question.
Is that okay if I just ask it?
There you go. Yeah.
Is that okay if I just address it towards Representative Grecius?
We're all going to hear, just so you know.
Yeah. Just making sure.
All right. Go ahead.
So to piggyback off of Senator Ibsen's question, Do TSA agents ever confiscate firearms? What is their role if it makes it to that point?
So when TSA locates a firearm in the bag, and mind you, I'm not an officer. This is my understanding from them, so they can correct it when they come up. But my understanding is when TSA locates a firearm in the bag, they immediately notify the officer on duty. That officer then is the one that comes and does that confiscation. We'll take them into a room, have a conversation. Why do you have this? What's going on? And do their investigation from there. So TSA does not physically lay hands on the firearm. That's all the department.
And just a follow-up question, you mentioned there are still fines associated on a federal level. Is that on a civil basis, or are there criminal charges that go along with that?
I'm not going to pretend to know the answer to that.
Jackie,
I'm going to look at Jackie.
I believe they're civil fines, but they, like Representative Gracia said, there's a pretty big range. I think it can be up to $15,000. Like it can go pretty high.
Okay.
I know there are other penalties, like losing your TSA pre-check. I may have a friend that happened to.
Yeah.
No, that one really is a friend. Like, I have my own stuff, but okay. Representative Romero.
I think we all know that person, actually.
Yeah.
I think we all know that person.
All right.
My question for you, to follow up on them, because I asked who would take a gun with them to the airport, but the good senator answered that. Well, not at least. How many people are actually? Do we have a statistic on how many people have, since the laws went into effect, this is impacted?
So the numbers are updating daily. I was just told in the back, I want to say 37 since the bill went into effect. It may be 36. The last number I saw was that 16 of those citations were issued. The rest were sent to the prosecutor's office for screening. So prior to the bill going into effect, they would screen all the cases through the prosecutor's office. So there has been a shift in behavior with the citations being issued. Now, I know that sounds like a really high number. It's not statistically different from what we've seen historical years for the same date ranges.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Okay, we're going to go ahead and invite, we have, I believe, Salt Lake County District Attorney Gill is here. Was here. Did he leave? There he is. All right. And Will, his compadre that we're very familiar with. Would you like to come up, Sam? Okay. And then following that, we'll have Salt Lake Police Association, Joe McBride, I believe he's here, and Captain Bennett from the Airport Division.
I think the way they wanted to present the testimony was in the sequential order.
Sorry, we'll need you to do the introduction.
Yes, my name is Sim Gill. I'm the Salt Lake County DA with Will Carlson, my policy advisor. I think the way they wanted to share all the testimony was in sequential order, with TSA and airport going first, then law enforcement who would come in contact with as a citizen would move in, and then me third in terms of as the case would move forward. So with the committee's indulgence, I think if we can present that information, it would keep it in its sequential order, if that's all right.
Okay.
Thank you.
I don't know that I care. Yeah, you can do that.
Chair Wilcox and members of the committee, I'm Bill Wyatt. I'm Executive Director of Airports for Salt Lake City, and with me is David Quayle, who is a Salt Lake City attorney assigned to the airport. And I think the reason we wanted to go in this order is to start at a fairly high level. I'm always aware when I talk to a group of people here about the airport that everybody has experienced the airport as a passenger. And so you can draw your own conclusions from that. I am aware that some of you have experienced this issue at the airport, so you can draw your own conclusions from that as well. But just to start with, the day before you go to the airport to get your plane, you get your boarding pass, and typically now about half, I think, are getting them on their iPhones, and you go through a little series of questions, and you're asked whether or not you will bring any prohibited items, and you verify that you will not. And firearms are one of the items that you verify that you will not be bringing to the airport. Last fiscal year, I think it was, or no, last calendar year, 115 people brought firearms to the airport, and the same for the year before. And so I think to the representative's point, on the one hand, it seems like a lot, and it has actually grown pretty substantially in recent years. On the other hand, last year we had, 27 million passengers go through Salt Lake International Airport. So consider that as context. On the other hand, when you come to the airport, you may drive, you may take an Uber, you may take a Lyft, you may take tracks, some people do. You may have someone drop you off, which is fairly common. But only about 30% of the people who arrive at the airport park at the airport. They may park off site, but they don't necessarily park at the airport. And of those, and I'll get to why I'm giving you these stats because I think it's useful to know, only about 20% park in the garage, and the balance are out in the shuttle bus lots. So short-term, long-term, et cetera. So a relatively small number actually park in the airport. And today we had 26,000 people arrive at the front door of the airport. So all of those people are going to get on a plane. They're going to experience the checkpoint and hopefully get to wherever it is they're going. They're joined by another, 15,000 people or so who are connecting through Salt Lake. Those numbers have really shifted, frankly, since COVID, and I would expect that the connecting passengers will increasingly grow as a portion of the overall total. And then there are 17,000 people who have these, which are airport badges. And to have one of these, you have to be an employee of an airport employer, so an airline, the Department of Airports, or whomever. And you go through a fairly stiff vetting process. You obviously fill out an application for your employer, and that is submitted to the airport. And then your information is sent to the TSA, and you go through the databases that they have available to them. And they look at, various terrorist databases. They look at no-fly lists. They look at exclusions that may have been issued to you, and so forth, just to be sure that you are eligible to receive a badge and work at the airport. So just to say, on an average day, we can have anywhere from 70 to 90,000 people in the airport. Not on an average day, on a busy day. It's a small city all by itself. And when something interrupts the flow of activity at the airport, things could come to a pretty rapid halt. And I'll give you a couple of examples. In April of 2020, shortly after the events surrounding COVID became apparent where things were headed, we had an earthquake at the airport. And it was startling because we were 5 months from moving into the new airport. Not a lot of maintenance money had been spent on the old airport, which was about to be torn down. And all of the security equipment in the airport went haywire. And so the TSA was unable to verify that everybody who was in the secure side of the airport got there properly, had been screened and scanned and so forth. What do you do in those circumstances? And those of you who remember the days after 9/11 will remember those periods when they would dump the entire airport, meaning pull people off of planes, out of the concourses, and outside of security, and then have them rescreened. So we had an event like this, not at Salt Lake, but recently in this country, and it was in Atlanta, an airport that I'm obviously familiar with because we're a Delta hub as well. Individual shows up at the checkpoint with a firearm, loaded, safety off, goes for the bag after realizing what's occurred. The bag goes off the edge and goes off in the checkpoint. And so this is the busiest airport in the world. The checkpoint is emptied, the concourse is emptied, people are taken off of their planes and rescreened, and the airport was basically shut down for a period of 4 or 5 hours. And that's kind of what happens. There are precautions that have been taken subsequently to be able to better manage these circumstances, but it's a serious matter. So at our airport, when you get there, after having verified that you have nothing that is prohibited to go beyond the checkpoint, you may check a bag, and about 60% of our passengers do that. The others are rollerboards and just carry on. And then you go down to the security checkpoint and you stand in whatever line you've qualified for, whether it's pre-check or standard or clear in our case. You get up to the document checking area, you give them your boarding pass in most cases, and some form of ID. Now, by this point, by the way, the TSA knows exactly who you are because you bought a ticket. The minute you buy a ticket, all of that data goes through these national databases because otherwise they'd have no way of rubbing that against the no-fly list, the terrorist list, and so on and so forth. Then you proceed to the checkpoint. And in Salt Lake, because we're building a brand new airport, we acquired really the best technology that was available for the checkpoints because it is arguably the most stressful part of travel. And also it can be a tremendous choke point in the whole experience, both for the airport, but particularly for passengers. And so you put all of your things in the bin, or 2 bins, or 3 bins, or how many ever it takes, goes up, gets scanned, and then sits there for a moment while a TSA agent looks at the screen to see what he sees or she sees. Now, in our case, we're still using X-ray technology. The day is coming when we'll have computed tomography, so it'll be 3-dimensional instead of just 1-dimensional. But guns tend to show up pretty clearly on these screens. I had asked the TSA if I could bring a picture, and they said no. So you'll just have to use your imagination to see what you're seeing.
Super reasonable.
Excuse me?
Sorry, super reasonable. There you go. Okay.
So there is the TSO, the Transportation Security Officer, sitting there at the screen and sees a gun. Now, this doesn't happen every day. As I said, 115, 365 days in a year, but it happens often enough. And they look up. Now, they can't tell of the 10 to 20 people standing in front of them at that point whose bag it is. They just know there is a gun. They push a little button that you as passengers can't see. That alerts the airport control center. And the airport control center then dispatches a police officer. And I might say at this point, in terms of law enforcement at the airport, the only thing the airport operator is obligated to provide the TSA is arrest authority at the checkpoint. We actually do a lot more. We have patrol on the roadways. We patrol the concourses, the bag haul, and so on and so forth, just because the airport is such a large, potentially soft target. But in any event, that is a requirement. Typically, and Captain Bennett will be here with us. He's the captain in charge of the airport division. Chief Brown is here as well. But typically, the officer arrives, I would say, within a matter of seconds, as in 2 minutes or 3 minutes, because their stations are very close by the checkpoint. Not all airports are so fortunate to be able to have that, but we do. Meanwhile, at that checkpoint line, nothing is happening. Everybody is standing there wondering what's happening, why the trays aren't moving, why they're not moving. And pretty soon the backup starts creeping out towards the bag haul. We have 14 lines, of which 9 or 10 at one time are used. So when one is down, it makes a very big difference, particularly, as is likely the case, it occurs in the midst of a Delta bank, right? Delta flies in like this, everybody gets off. They fly out like this, everybody gets on. And so over the course of a really busy day at the airport, you can be there and feel like no one's there. But when you're there, typically everybody's there because you're flying out along with everybody else. So the officer arrives, and Captain Bennett will go through this in greater detail, and begins to assess the situation. And as quickly as is practicable, moves the individual in question, puts them together with their bag, and puts them in a private screening room so they can continue this conversation. But until that happens, nothing is going on at that checkpoint line. So I think it's very important to understand how that functions. Now, I understand that that member of the committee who's had a prior experience with this was given his weapon back. And I've thought a lot about this because if you think about the evolution of airport security it's been a wild ride. I began my career running large hub airports. I was hired in Portland as executive director of the Port of Portland, which owns Portland International. I was hired on September 5th, 2001. And just a few days later, obviously the world changed, and suddenly, if you showed up at the checkpoint with a gun, you went to jail. There was no citation, there was no form. That all has evolved in significant ways along with the technology, because at that time, the scanners that were used, basically it was just magnetometers at airports. They didn't even use x-ray machines at the checkpoint. So things have changed and they have evolved. And at Salt Lake, currently, people don't walk away with their gun. And I just want to set the stage for you before I turn it over to you for questions, or to the captain. If you get your gun back, you're not going through the checkpoint. You're going to have to take it somewhere. And in these days in Salt Lake, this is many years ago actually, when you were given your gun back, what did you do? If you weren't parked in the garage, you went out, and we have officers who were working at the time who will verify this. You put it in a planter, you stuck it behind a column somewhere, and these weapons were often found, right? Because people wanted, what they really wanted to do was get back and get on their plane and go where they were going. So I think that the current process, as I understand it, means these people are likely to get their firearms back, but they're also able to get on the plane with their family or go to their business meeting or whatever it happens to be. And so I know there will be more questions about that for the department, or perhaps for the DA as well. But just give you a sense about that. Our airport is the most recovered airport in the United States. We're running at full tilt. Whenever there is an interruption in any of these processes, the place begins to vibrate a little bit, you can tell. And so I'm very concerned with the efficient operation of the airport, as I think all of you would be as well. It plays an enormously important role here in the state, and we want to see it continue to do so. The TSA part of this, I can speak to that. They issue fines that can go up, I actually think, up to $12,500. They've issued several of those in the last year. They don't intend to change their policy whatsoever. If you've had this experience before, you may notice that you seem to get selected for secondary screening often. And I think what that means is all the time for a period of up to 6 months or so. And you may or may not lose your pre-check status if you have it. That's not something we have any control over, but my understanding is that isn't going to change anytime soon. The other thing I would say, this is a recent development. Today with this badge, I can go to any secure area of the airport pretty much unimpeded. The TSA, after a lot of experience with this, has decided that they're going to start increasing the level of screening for all airport employees, not just department, but airline and others. And the reason they're doing that is there are 3 airports in the country that have 100% mandatory employee screening. You experience the same thing as a passenger would every time you go into the secure area of the airport, which for some of us can be multiple times a day. And the reason they're doing that is because of the concern about the things they're seeing going through the employee portion of the screening and the checkpoint, meaning guns, drugs in some cases, and other prohibited items. And so we're on notice. The first phase of this starts in September. It'll be a random screening, and it'll ramp up over a period of about 3 or 4 years to 100% employee screening, which is going to be a big challenge for us. We'll figure it out. I happen to support this initiative. I think it's the right thing to do in the interest of aviation security. But so as passengers, don't think we're picking on you. You know, everybody is going to have the same experience, and in our case, I think it's a good thing. And that concludes my remarks. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any members of the committee that have questions? Representative Gracious? No? Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair and committee, it's good to be with you again. My comments will be brief, and then I'll turn the time over to Captain Bennett. But the Salt Lake City Police Department takes pride in its duty to protect the travelers, airline employees, airport workers at the Salt Lake International Airport. Having a firearm, whether loaded or unloaded, at a TSA security checkpoint poses an unacceptable threat to our officers, airline employees, and travelers. Captain Bennett is here to explain more in detail of how we operate and how we handle our criminal investigations when a firearm ends up at a TSA security checkpoint. I want to reassure this committee that the Salt Lake City Police Department is conforming to the standards and expectations outlined in House Bill 461. Safety at the airport is a shared responsibility. Disregarding the law will have consequences. The simple act of checking your bag carefully to ensure there are no firearms or prohibited items inside before you get to the airport can prevent potential harm, improve everyone's travel experience, and contribute to the safety and security of our entire community. Our commitment to public safety at the airport and throughout our city will never wane. Thank you, and I'll yield the time to Captain Bennett.
Chairman and committee members, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Captain Stephen Bennett. I'm the Division Commander for Salt Lake City Police Department over the Airport Division. I know there's been many questions about our application of this law, so I'll proceed. Director Wyatt went over a lot of the procedures that we do when an alarm comes through with someone with a gun at the screening checkpoint as far as our response to that. So I'll touch on it from the point that the officers receive the call. It's immediately treated like any other criminal investigation. Officers are going out to determine if there's a crime committed and if they have probable cause to make an arrest. We do take the safety and security of the traveling public very seriously. Small things getting through can cause large problems down the road. Once the officers identify or have been notified that there's a firearm in a piece of luggage, they respond to the scene, take possession of the firearm, and escort the person who brought the firearm back to an additional screening room where they conduct their investigation. And during that investigation, they're asking them questions. Is this your gun? Is this your bag? Do you often carry the gun in your bag? Were you aware that you were traveling to the airport today? Were you aware that it's illegal to bring a gun to the screening checkpoint of the airport? These questions that are asked are used to establish probable cause. And with the recent law change, yes, criminal negligence was taken away, but we feel that in most cases, we're meeting the reckless standard as part of the law as it's currently written. By the time you get to the airport, you've had many opportunities to make sure you checked your baggage, make sure you're aware that your gun is or is not in there, and you've continued to the checkpoint, not exercising the standard of care that an ordinary person would do. And I think we can show that with the fact that over 12 million people come through the front door of the airport every day, and I know we could work on the math on that, on taking out children and people who don't own firearms. But even with those numbers taken out, I would argue that those 115 people that have shown up over the last 2 years in a row, we've had 115, that they're not showing the same standard of care than an ordinary person traveling through the airport would do. Each of these investigations is unique. We look at all the aspects of it. But again, most cases, we feel that it does fit the standard. There was an incident recently. I'll give you an exception to this rule. We had a person come through the screening checkpoint, a woman with some toddlers and a baby, and the gun was located in the diaper bag. So as that went through, gun comes out of the bag. She's like, oh my gosh, that's my husband's gun. I don't know how it got in there. Obviously, we're not going to take her to jail in that case, but we still seize the firearm and continue the investigation to determine, was the husband aware it was in there? We're trying to get further into this. We have a potential child endangerment case in that. How many times does a parent ask their child to go grab a diaper out of the diaper bag? Those of us that have children have experienced that. Worst thing you could do is have a child come back with a firearm they were unaware was in there. We are following this law, and the law is working. The gun is only temporarily seized. If we seize it issue a citation or screen it, the gun is returned to the person, either if the case is dismissed or they've paid the bail amount or fine, or at the completion of the court case. It has no evidentiary value at that point. So I feel that we are doing our best to provide for the safety and security of the traveling public. I mean, just in this year, from January 1st to July 31st, we've had 62 cases. And I can tell you that as of today, that number's risen to 66 that have come through the checkpoint, which means we're probably in a year that we're going to see a significant high water mark on these. Since May 3rd, when the law went into effect, we've had 34 cases come through, 35 today that we would count. Those cases, in most circumstances, if they meet that lower standard of recklessness, not intentional or knowingly, they receive a citation. That sends them on their way and starts the court process in an expedient fashion so they can deal with that. It's an infraction, just so everyone knows that. It's the lowest level of criminal offense. It's lower than a speeding ticket in most cases. It doesn't go on your criminal history, and it is a fine, and then they get their gun back. If it's intentional or knowingly, then it's a different route. It's a go to jail and a much harsher penalty attached to that. If for some reason there's an issue like this woman with the diaper bag and the gun in it, they will screen the case, and that means that the case goes before our detective, who conducts further investigation. A person sent on their way without a citation. The gun is taken and held in our evidence unit until we determine where the gun goes or where we're going with this case. Once the detective has finished the follow-up, that information is then sent to the city attorney's office or the district attorney's office for them to determine if they're going to move forward with prosecution on that. As for the question of whether or not an order was given that everyone will be issued a citation regardless of probable cause, that's patently false. The order that was given was that if probable cause is met, they will be issued a citation if it's met there at the scene. If it requires further follow-up, the case will be screened. So there was never at any time an order that every person with a gun, regardless of situation, will be cited. And in this case, the situation is the only part of discretion that was taken away is that if there is a gun taken or a gun at the checkpoint and probable cause is there, that a citation will be issued. There's no chance for a warning at the checkpoint. And that's a position we feel strongly on.
Does that conclude your presentation?
Yes, it does. Any questions?
Yeah, there's going to be several. Representative Ballard, you had your light on first, sir.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 2 questions, very, very brief here. The first one, I just wanted to clarify from what I heard Director Wyatt and your explanation. So if somebody goes and they have a gun, that gun is seized and they don't get it back until after the court case. So they don't get the director made it sound like they get it back at the airport and then they proceed. So is that correct, that you seize it and it is held until the court case? Is that correct?
We do, and I'd like to use the term we're holding it for evidence until we determine the direction of the investigation. Okay. We're not actually seizing the firearm permanently or asset forfeiture angles on that. It's strictly for evidence.
So I just want to clarify that, because that does change what it seemed that it would be a danger to everybody else at the airport, but the gun is removed. The second question is, where is the citation? Who does the citation? Does it come from your department? Does it come from the DA's office? I don't know who ends up doing that citation.
The citation comes from our officers. It's no different than receiving a shoplifting citation or something of that nature. It looks identical to our traffic. Well, we used to have traffic tickets on paper. Now it's all electronic, but it looks very similar.
Okay. And is that written in code, or is that clear? I don't know if Jackie has any explanation. I just wanted to make sure that that's clear. That's clear.
We can issue citations on anything that's less than a Class A misdemeanor. So Class B, C, and infractions, we can issue citations on.
So any of the others have to come from the DA's office?
They're either taken to jail and the process started there, or the case is screened, and yes, they come through the DA's office.
Okay, so it's both, right? Yeah. Okay, that's what is that clear in code as well? Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Representative Stoddard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What percentage, if you could guess, of these cases are screened versus released on citation?
Since the so prior to the law change, and as many of you know, Salt Lake City Police Department took over airport policing about 3 years ago. I take it back, 4 years ago. 4. Prior to the recent law change, our current policy was that any firearm at screening, assuming probable cause could be met, would be screened through the city attorney or district attorney's office. Once that law went into effect, we started discussing it with our legal counsel and felt it was in the best interest to start issuing citations. So we started doing that. First part of June is where we started moving things that way. Majority have been citations, and probably still a smattering of screenings as we implement the newer direction we're going.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Gwynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Following up on Representative Stoddard's question, there are some in this room that were here during the original debate. Do you feel that the policy that you've enacted or been carrying out is in line with the legislative intent?
I feel it's in accordance with the way the law is written, sir.
Okay. Do you feel it is in line with the legislative intent?
I can't speak to the intent.
Okay. The case with the woman who had the diaper bag, was her husband interviewed?
He was not there. She was traveling alone.
But she was issued a citation?
She was not.
She was not?
She was not.
Was it screened?
It was screened.
Okay. Thank you.
So that was an interesting answer on intent, because really what we're talking about is, with all of this stuff, is intent, right? We're trusting our officers every day in every scenario to try to judge that stuff in a little mini scenario, no matter where you are, right? You're going to react very differently to somebody who you believe is willful and actively choosing to break the law. But that answer was very different. So I think the legislative intent's pretty clear. And it might be a case that we need to adjust the code if it's not understood. But to say that I don't recognize the intent is a little bit concerning. Do you have any more questions from the committee? Okay, I do want to ask one more myself. Just like I do have one more. Here, I'll go back to it in a minute, now that I started down this myself. And that is this concept of, maybe this is a question for our staff, but this legal concept of what an ordinary person would do. What is an ordinary person? Does that always fit the same definition? So if we have any of our attorneys, I'm happy to have you answer that. Want to take a shot?
So the ordinary person standard is just a bedrock concept in the law. We have criminal negligence, and then we have civil negligence. So whenever you're held negligent, either under the criminal standard or the civil standard, it's basically saying, even if you didn't know, like a reasonable person or an ordinary person of reasonable intelligence would know that you shouldn't driving into oncoming traffic, or do certain things that we've agreed as a society that we're all on the same page. And it does evolve over time. I mean, it used to be like nobody would ever cross a railroad crossing without looking both ways. Like nobody would do that. You know, a reasonable person wouldn't do that. So it evolves over time, but it's just a bedrock standard that we have to use in order to judge the conduct of a particular person. Does that help?
Right. Yeah, no, but that actually makes my point. So I appreciate that, because, frankly, we talked about this. Here I am, our committee's working on the school security task force, right? all this stuff. I literally had a shotgun in the back of my truck every day of high school. Just did. Nobody cared. It was normal. Now, if my kids showed up with a shotgun in the back of the truck, hanging up like I did, it'd be questions, at the very least. Right? So it does change over time. Yeah, go ahead.
One thing that Chad actually just pointed out too, it's usually a jury question. So it's something that, you know, jury of your peers would say, you know, was it reasonable that this person did this or did not do this?
Right. Yeah, so I'm a little concerned that the answer out of the gate was we sort of assume that these are reckless. Go ahead, Senator Reeby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as we start to look at how this bill has evolved, has it caused people to have less of an idea that, you know, this is acceptable behavior where we can bring a weapon to the airport because we've created this legislation? So is the number increasing with the people that are bringing weapons to the airport, or has the numbers remained the same? Because to me, if it's increasing, our population has increased. Maybe the number of people going through our airport has increased, but would the increase be tied to the fact that people aren't taking this law as seriously? Because I respect the officers and the work they do, and I've had many officers come to me and say that they are feeling increasingly in harm's way with the proliferation of weapons in their community. So I am trying to thread that needle for myself. So is there ability to answer that question with your knowledge?
Senator, I'm glad you brought up the risk to officers now. We're seeing much more risk to officers. In fact, in the last year and a half, 2 of my officers were assaulted. One in the front area of the lobby. I think it made the news a number of times, where someone just came up behind him and sucker punched him. We had another incident where a male ran through the screening area. Again, TSA does not have arrest authority or ability to detain. One of my officers intervened and was in one of the worst fights of his career. There is risk at the airport. Adding firearms into the mix, especially at the screening checkpoint, creates additional risk for us. I can't say whether the law has affected the number of guns coming to the airport. I can tell you that Salt Lake City has been in the top 10 airports for guns recovered at the screening checkpoint. I can also tell you that this year nationally, the numbers are increasing. TSA has put out a number of press releases showing that nationwide they're seeing a significant increase in firearms showing up at the screening checkpoint. And looking at our current numbers, I'd say we're no different. I think this will be a record year for us in Salt Lake City.
Thank you. I do support people's right to bear arms and own them, and we own weapons in our house. Guns, I don't know, my husband does, but I just there has to be some kind of balance here, and so I would hope that we could work together to find that balance, because I feel for my police officers in the field. It's becoming increasingly scarier, and it's just not okay. So thank you for your service, and thank you for your time today.
Can I add to that?
Thank you, Senator. Hey, we have a question here from Senator Thatcher. Yeah, we can't hear you, Senator. It sounded like a good speech, though. I don't know. Okay, he was unmuted, it looks like. Now he's muted again and might be resetting. Okay, I'm going to go to Representative Gracious here while we're waiting for Senator Thatcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do want to circle back to there was no order given. I had an email shared with me by an officer with directives from a lieutenant specifically saying that you are now being asked, the difference in policy is they are now being asked to write a citation in these cases rather than screen every case. And so I have seen that. So I don't know if there's a disconnect between you and others within your organization on what is occurring. But so what you're saying, though, just to clarify, is that there was not an order given?
No, I think there's two issues being commingled here. One, the order was issued that they would receive a citation instead of screened in most cases. If, and that's the if, is if probable cause was met. It wasn't on every person that brings a gun through gets a ticket. It's if probable cause exists, they get a ticket. And I think those two issues are getting confused in what the direction was.
May I ask 2 follow-ups, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I have also received a copy of something that was printed out with questions for officers to ask in order to get from that negligent standard to that reckless standard. Is that something that was distributed by your department?
It was distributed by one of my watch commanders, one of my lieutenants, to his shift in an effort to aid them in seeing how the reckless standard applies to the cases that we're dealing with. It wasn't sent out from our training unit or from our attorneys. It was merely a guideline to give them some direction in how to handle those cases.
Very specific direction. And then hypothetically, say I'm not me, and I don't always carry a firearm, we'll say that. But I'm going through an airport checkpoint. I grab my husband's gym bag. I'm running out of town for an emergency funeral. I don't know there's a firearm in there. I get to the checkpoint. I had no idea it was in there. I didn't know it was ever in there. I knew he owned one. I didn't know where it was. Would that be considered a citable offense?
No.
So what I received from an officer at the department was that there was a woman who went through the screening checkpoint who had her husband's bag. It had that firearm in it. And what I was informed was that you personally issued the directive to issue that citation to that woman. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct.
Okay.
So I think we're talking about the same case with the woman with the diaper bag.
There was not a diaper bag mentioned in the information shared with me. And it was specific to a husband's bag.
Then without knowing the specific case, I can't speak to that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Did we get Senator Thatcher back? Are we sweet video games? Let's do this.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Oh, rock on, man. I hope this isn't a shooter game we're playing.
All right. So I often get frustrated when we're talking about guns because it feels like we separate to partisan corners, and I feel like we're not always discussing due process, and I think that is the important thing here. I was very frustrated and disappointed by the comment about we feel like this is within the law, but we're not going to try and guess what your intent was. Well, I think that's literally what we've been doing here. I think that we have these deliberations, we have these discussions, we have public comment, and we talk about what the intent is specifically so that if there's confusion, it's clear this is the reason for which we are doing this. So there's two sides that I'm seeing here. Do we believe that people are intentionally and deliberately attempting to circumvent security and travel with weapons? Because if we believe that that is what's happening, then I think then that's a different problem. But it seems to me like what we believe legislatively is that these cases tend to be mistakes. They tend to be oversights. They tend to be not deliberate. Now, the disruption caused, I can see that, I can respect that, and I think that needs to be addressed and that needs to be taken care of. But intent is critically important. First off, we are the ones elected to make the decisions for how things are handled in the state of Utah. It's literally our job to set how the state of Utah should function. We can't control what TSA does. They're going to do what they're going to do. And it sounds to me like regardless of our actions here today, TSA is still going to slam anybody who makes a mistake. So I'd like to encourage everybody to please try and look at this from a standpoint of, do we believe people are deliberately trying to travel with weapons? If they are, that's a different conversation. My concern is someone who does not have criminal intent having their property seized, and let me be clear, I'll just spell this out. I mean also the cost of defending yourself. Now, if you're deliberately trying to break the law and you are not remorseful and you are not doing your best, then okay, consequences are what they are. You can't fly with weapons. I believe that the problem we're trying to address here is the issue of due process and hammering people with severe consequences who do not otherwise have criminal intent. So I think it's important for the legislature to get on the record. Is that our intent? Because that's my intent. My intent is to make sure that those who are being punished by the government by spending money, by having their property taken, by facing potential, and I appreciate that you say it's an infraction, but it's still a pretty big deal if this happens to you. So my concern is making sure that that is happening to people with proper mens rea and intent, and that we are not hurting innocent people who otherwise intended no harm or offense.
Thank you. Okay, appreciate that, Senator Reeby. Senator Thatcher. Love the headset. Again, Senator Reeby, did you have another question?
I just want to follow up on, is there any other precedent where we ask our officers to measure the intent of somebody's actions? You know, when you drive drunk, you could say that you were drunk. So we created a tool to measure how drunk you were. When you're driving down the highway and we say you're speeding, do we have a nebulous definition of you speeding? No, we have a radar gun that decides whether you're speeding. So when we're asking our officers to decide the intent of what somebody is doing or their thoughts, do we have any other law out there that asks us to ask law enforcement to use a nebulous rule? And so when we start taking out reckless and negligence, I feel for people that make a mistake and they bring a weapon to the airport. I'm sorry, you made a mistake, but you could say other people have made mistakes too. Oh, I was listening to the radio, I started speeding really fast. Does the police officer care? No, you're going to get the ticket. So I think we're putting our officers in a really hard spot. And if there is going to be a dichotomous key that we can have them use, but right now you're asking people to make that decision quickly in a situation where we have 27 million people moving through. Our businesses depend on this. And so I would like to know if there's any other rule or law out there that is this nebulous that's asking our officers to make this decision.
Yeah, I would love to answer that question, but I think Representative Gwynn's going to have more fun with it. So, Representative, go ahead.
I don't know if fun is the word I would use today. The answer to your question is yes, and I think that speaks to kind of what we're dealing with here, right? We have the issue regarding legislative intent and interpretation of the law, right? And then you have, again, I think what brought this to question is you have an officer's discretion. Yes, the radar gun tells the officer that someone is speeding, but ultimately it's that officer's decision as to whether or not they're actually going to make the traffic stop. They make contact with the driver. It's ultimately that officer that's engaged in that interaction to determine whether or not they're actually going to write the traffic citation. And so I think some of the concern here is that some of that discretion has been removed. There was an obvious shift in the way business was being handled. And, you know, is that discretion being taken away? And if it has been taken away, are they knowingly and intentionally going against the will of the legislative intent when the law was passed?
So may I follow up with a question?
Sure, go for it.
When we talk about somebody speeding, there is a hazard. And then when we talk about someone driving drunk, there is a hazard. And so when you find someone driving drunk, you're definitely going to arrest them because that's a bigger hazard. And so we make it more precise. Speeding is not as it's egregious, but not as egregious. But carrying a weapon through an airport, we've decided that that's an egregious violation. Just like carrying a bigger baggie of shampoo. I mean, we've definitely driven a line that we want our airports to be safe, and these are the things that need them to be safe. So I think that I understand your point of speeding, but this is a weapon in an airport, which is a lot more a hard line than speeding.
Thank you, Senator. And I'm going to just drop in, and then it looks like you want to say something else again, too. But we're talking about two different comparisons, one law that requires mens rea and one that doesn't. So it's not really a correct comparison anyway. But the short answer is we trust them. In fact, when we swear them in, we trust them to make those snap judgments all the time. They're like little mini judges, right? They're using their very best judgment, prior to that thing. That's why they determine probable cause with everything we ask them to do. It's not just these scenarios. It's literally every case. So that answer is, yeah, all the time. This isn't like not only uncommon, this is what we expect them to do. Yeah, Representative.
And further, when we talk about discretion, probable cause, right, it's that officer's interpretation. I am not going to sit here and be ignorant and be naive, right? Police officers, especially when they're working together on cases, frequently, often will disagree on whether or not they have probable cause.
Yep.
And so, even though probable cause is outlined in, did they fail to walk and turn? Did they fail to be, like, all those things, right, are used to make a decision, but ultimately there has to be a decision as to whether or not probable cause exists. We leave that up to the discretion of our officers, and there are times where they do conflict with one another.
Yeah, thank you. Representative Romero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my question for Salt Lake Police would be, when you compare our airport to other airports across the country, I mean, what is the general operation of that local police department? Are they seeing similar issues that we're seeing here in Utah, or are ours a little bit more confusing since we're so pro-gun? And I know there's other red states out there. Is their protocol similar to ours, or how do they handle a situation like this?
So what we're seeing is nationwide, we're seeing a lot of this, and there is a lot of different ways different airports handle things. But I would say the vast majority of the airports, there's a criminal penalty for bringing a gun to the airport. In most cases, or in a lot of places, it's either a Class A or a felony, which means that person goes to jail for bringing a gun to the airport versus getting a ticket, an infraction that they can deal with on the court side. And just because we issue the ticket doesn't mean someone will be found guilty of it. If we have probable cause, which is just the bare minimum to get us past that threshold, it then moves on to the prosecutorial side, and I'll let Sim Gill explain that.
So what I'm hearing, Mr. Chair, is that our laws here in Utah are a little bit more lenient than other states that have a major airport in their city.
Well, certainly after the bill we just passed. Yeah. Okay, thank you. I don't see any further questions from the committee. We'll go ahead and move to our Salt Lake County DA. And just to explain, and you guys clarify if I'm getting this wrong, but I understand that you have a contractual relationship in addition to being the county DA with Salt Lake City, and that's where this comes in.
I shall answer all your questions.
Okay.
Hopefully, right. I don't know. Good afternoon, members of the chair and committee members here. I'm Sim Gill, the elected district attorney for Salt Lake County, and the appointed city prosecutor for Salt Lake City through an interlocal agreement. So I'm the elected DA, but we are also, through an interlocal agreement, represent the city prosecutor's office. You've asked about our interpretation for HB 461, how it was communicated to law enforcement and the prosecutions related to it. Along with me is Will Carlson, who's also my chief policy advisor working on these issues. We had the privilege to work at the last legislative session together, and we're happy to answer any other questions. So let me just make some remarks. Our roles are different but are interconnected. You create the laws, we enforce them. Prosecutorial independence and discretion are essential to the work that we do, to our community. Prosecutor decisions are based on the facts of each case, current laws, and the pursuit of justice. In fact, I just recently joined an effort to help Afghan prosecutors who risk their lives and their discretion in trying to do exactly that. This experience reinforces why prosecutorial independence is vital. The unique dynamic between legislative and executive branches keep our justice system intact. As an office, we have interpreted HB 461 in the following ways. It brought two fundamental changes to the laws about bringing firearms to the airport. First, HB 461 prohibits the forfeiture of firearms seized at the airport as a part of any case settlement. Second, negligently bringing guns to the airport has been decriminalized, but the intentional, knowing, or reckless actions are still punishable under our state statute. For decades, Utah has had statutory definitions for different mental states associated with criminal acts such as intentional, knowing, reckless, and negligent. The mental state of recklessness is legally defined as when a person, quote, is aware but consciously disregards the substantial and justifiable risk that the circumstances exist or the result will occur. The risk must be of such nature and degree that its disregard constitutes a gross deviation from the standard of care that an ordinary person would exercise under all circumstances as viewed from the actor's standpoint. In contrast, the law states that a person is negligent when they ought to be aware. So it's the same follow-up as the supports indicated, legislative aids indicated. So it's the difference between is and ought. Is and ought. And this law basically got rid of the negligent part of that. That was the HB 461. Negligence and recklessness are different and lower mental standards than acting with knowledge or intent. Knowingly or intentionally bringing a gun into the airport is a Class A misdemeanor. So we have an infraction, and under our state statutory system, law enforcement can issue citations up to Class B misdemeanors. Anything that is A or above must be screened with the district attorney's office. So we look to make sure before a complaint is issued. House Bill 461 removed negligence from the equation when it comes to the offense of bringing guns into an airport. So, since May 3rd, the only way a person can violate this law at the infraction level is to recklessly bring a gun into the airport. Therefore, for an infraction, we now must prove that an individual was aware of the risk that they had a gun in their bag but disregarded that risk. Here's a hypothetical. Suppose passenger A and passenger B both are stopped at a TSA checkpoints after their guns are found in their bags. Passenger A says, quote, I put a gun in my bag and I later brought the same bag to the airport. I just forgot to take it out, end quote. While passenger B says, quote, that's my husband's bag and he asked me to bring it, but I had no gun was in there, end quote. In those two situations, passenger B should have known there was a gun in the bag and was negligent, but passenger A did know and just never bothered to take it out and was reckless. With the passage of House Bill 461, passenger A would be guilty of an infraction, but passenger B would not. That was the change that the law made. Second, you asked how our office interpretation has been communicated to law enforcement. And we've heard rumors from police about our office policy ranging from a refusal to prosecute any case to a mandate to charge everyone who brings a gun into the airport. Neither extreme is our office policy, and we have tried to communicate our office policy to the city. I have provided you with examples of our efforts to share our office policy. There is a June 5 email. On June 5, our Chief Policy Advisor, Will Carlson, sent an internal email of our office policy to the First Assistant, Scott Fisher. On or about July 7th, on June 30th, Scott Fisher drafted a memorandum which included Will Carlson's email as well as a summary of 7 appellate decisions from the Utah Supreme Court and the Utah Court of Appeals that explained the difference between recklessness and negligence. The memo was addressed to the Salt Lake City Attorney's Office, the Salt Lake City Police, the Salt Lake City Airport Police. Scott sent this draft memo to Salt Lake City Attorney's Office on July 7th. On July 20th, there's an email that was sent. On July 19, after receiving the legislator's letter, our office, I met with Salt Lake City Police Chief Mike Brown to reiterate our office position. The day after that meeting, July 20th, I sent Chief Brown an email repeating that we would prosecute intentional, knowing, or reckless cases, but not negligent ones. The email also reminded Chief Brown that prosecutors are always willing to screen when an officer declines to issue a citation and is unsure whether the elements of a crime have been met or not. As the discussion has showed, sometimes there are those hybrid gray area cases that may happen, and in that scenario, we're more than happy to screen and assist as necessary to help figure out based on the evidence that's there. On July 21, Mark Kittrell and Hannah Vickery of the Salt Lake City Attorney's Office asked our office to forward a finalized copy of memo that Scott Fisher sent to them on June 30th without the word draft Will Carlson removed the term draft and forwarded the memo again without making any substantive changes to the memo. He also sent a copy of the email I sent to Chief Brown the day before. As the Salt Lake County District Attorney, I work with multiple law enforcement agencies around the county. I am not in charge of any of those police departments. On this issue, as on all criminal justice issues, we try to help our law enforcement partners understand the legal requirements and the standards we will apply in any case. But each department and each officer has independent discretion in how to apply that law, and that discretion is important. Finally, you asked our office for me to report on any prosecutions for this offense since the passage of House Bill 461. The letter dated July 18 accused our office of wrongful prosecution and non-compliance with HB 461. We fundamentally disagree with those assertions. As an office, we are exercising our prosecutorial discretion and applying the new law to pending cases which predate the change. So even as the law went into effect with House Bill 461, lowering those standards, those cases that have been in the system, we're giving them the benefit of the doubt of House Bill 461 because that was the legislative intent. So we're trying to do that. This gives all our citizens the benefit of the legislature's new intent. There are 10 cases which occurred after May 3rd and have been filed by the Salt Lake City Justice Court. All 10 of those cases were filed by citation. 3 of them have resulted in a guilty plea or bail forfeiture, while the other 7 are still pending. Additionally, we have searched our internal database and have found 25 cases submitted to our office for screening, almost all since July 12th. Since receiving your letter, we have put an increased scrutiny on those cases and increased the size of the screening team for each of those infractions from 1 attorney to 3. That even though they may go in as citations, we are making sure that we're looking at them to review all the evidence that is there in a critical way to make sure it meets the new standard of recklessness that has been articulated by the legislature. This results in a substantial increased time to screen each case, but we are committed to executing the laws you have passed and are confident that the data indicates that we have been doing so diligently. The other thing I would point out is that just as the body here has noticed, the nuance and sometimes the complexity of interpreting that, and to the point that was raised by Senator Thatcher, remember, there are layers of review that occur. The law is, and the intent is written by you. The officers in good faith try to apply that standard. That's the first layer of our process. The second layer is that once that citation is issued and it comes to our office and we start to prosecute it, our attorneys look to see what the evidence is and whether it meets that standard or not, whether we can actually prove that beyond the probable cause. The third standard is that when we go to court, in infractions, we don't have jury trials. On Class A's we do, but in infractions, the court sits in judgment to make sure that the appropriate standard is being applied. And I can assure you, if there's an error on our part, defense attorneys are quick to point out where we have misapplied that standard as well. And I share that with you because those are the safeguards that are built into the system as we try to execute upon your legislative intent. It is your legislative role to create laws and our prosecutorial role to enforce them. We are committed to fulfilling our role with fidelity. This balance strengthens our democracy and the rule of law. And I am confident we all appreciate the value of this balance. And at this point, I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you. We appreciate you being here. Will, did you have anything you need to add?
I'm from the government, and I'm here to help.
Yeah, I figured that was the case. We're just not used to him sitting there without saying anything.
He let me speak, so.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a few questions for you. I appreciate what you said about implementation of 461. Applying that retroactively, essentially, to existing cases does show good faith. We appreciate that. And it certainly recognizes both the legislative intent and I was a little bit surprised, but thrilled to hear you recognize that as a benefit to the citizens. So the passage of the bill, the implementation is a benefit to those who have been in this situation. One of the concerns that got brought to us repeatedly when we were having this discussion during the session is that as a default, we were requiring forfeiture of the firearms. And that's something I've heard for years out of Salt Lake County, not like just with the airport thing, right? That was a condition of a plea in abeyance, or that was condition of dismissal, or anything else that you had to forfeit your firearm, which, intent established or not, when we've all agreed we're talking not about folks that are trying, well, none of us have a problem with prosecuting people that we agree intended to bring a firearm in or to cause any kind of harm or risk. What we're really talking about is people that we all agree didn't, right? So is that still happening?
Well, let me answer that,
Yeah.
and let me answer in two ways. First
Sure.
of all, it is very clear after House Bill 461 that will never happen. That was the intent of the legislature, and we will faithfully follow that. As to the prior to House Bill 461, I can answer that since I helped do the policy as the city prosecutor.
Sure.
As was mentioned, and that was within my discretion. And at the same time, it's within your discretion to file the laws that you do, and then my goal is to faithfully follow them. Prior to that, as was mentioned, Salt Lake City Airport was in the top 10 of gun violations. And so as a result, when we said that if we had a case that we were going to prosecute, I directed my prosecutors to do one of two things. Fundamentally, that if you were there, we were going to ask for the forfeiture of the weapon, because our goal was to send a very strong message that you should not be bringing guns in a post 9/11 world to a secured area of the airport. And I'll be honest with you, I wasn't a fan of House Bill 461, but I'm a prosecutor. You make the laws, and I will enforce them faithfully. That's the bargain. That's the expectation. And my policy concern was really driven by two fundamental facts. One, whether somebody actually tried to take a gun in a post 9/11 world to a secured area of the airport, or two, you didn't know where your gun was. I believe in the Second Amendment. I carry a sidearm. I think we have that was my policy direction in trying to address and mitigate that. As a result, we dropped down from the top 10. And I understand that may have looked heavy-handed and some people may have taken issues, but that's what I love about our participatory democracy. That issue was raised, the law was changed, and we will enforce it strictly as you've given us direction. We're not going to be forfeiting that. But that was the rationale behind that. And we also looked at that when a compelling argument was made, even when we were doing those forfeitures, if it was a family heirloom, we did not ask for necessarily a forfeiture, but the public policy objective really was to send a very specific, consistent point that we didn't want guns at the airport. And so that was the original rationale behind the original policy. But going forward, that is not the policy of the office, consistent with the application of House Bill 461.
Thank you. Do you have any cases right now that you're aware of where you're requiring forfeiture?
No, because as I said, we could academically, theoretically, for those offenses that happened before May 3rd, because they happened under the old law. But we've made a decision, a conscious decision as an office to give the benefit of the intent that the legislature wanted to effectuate. So the direction from our office to my attorneys is, even though we could technically do that, but since the law got changed, we will not be asking for forfeitures of those weapons of the cases that were dating prior to that. And anything that comes after that, obviously, there is no forfeiture of the weapon consistent with our with the laws that was passed.
Okay, so as a matter of policy right now, we no longer require forfeiture as a condition of a plea in abeyance or a dismissal or anything else.
And not only just policy, as a matter of legal application, I cannot ask for that. Because technically speaking, the law, as House Bill 461, prohibits me from doing that.
Okay. Representative Grecius, do you have a question?
Question/comment, if that's all right.
Yeah, go ahead.
I do just want to publicly thank both of you. As these conversations kind of went on, I had asked Mr. Carlson if their office, excuse me, would be willing to send a re-clarification email to the department on what the guidelines are. As we've kind of gone through this, the department has said, well, the DA's office told us to. The DA's office has said, no, that's not what's going on. And after that request, Mr. Gill did send that email along those lines, and I did appreciate that very much, just that reclarification. Also, originally of concern, which technically was in line with the policy, maybe not the intent, but the policy, is they were putting people on a 12-month probationary period following this incident, and they would receive their firearm back at the end of that 12 months. I learned today they've decided they're not even going to do that. Once they are done with the firearm as evidence, it goes back, which was the original intent of the bill. And so I do want to express my thanks for that. And then, just as a matter of question, to have it on record, did you inform Salt Lake PD that they need to cite all cases as reckless?
No.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And I just in all fairness, I just want to say at least my interactions have been that no one that I've come in contact with intentionally wants to violate the law. Not Salt Lake City PD, not our prosecutors. And if I became aware that somebody intentionally wanted to violate a law that this legislature passed, or what I have an obligation to enforce, that would be both unethical and illegal. And so it is very important to me. And nobody that I've come in contact with, none of the law enforcement folks or anybody, if there's any misunderstanding, that may have happened. But my experience is, in every contact that I have had, that there's a commitment to wanting to enforce the law and apply it consistent with the way that you've articulated it.
Thank you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate what you just said again, recognizing the importance of intent on both sides. Right? We screw up on the law enforcement side too. Depends. We make mistakes. It depends on what our intent was.
Yeah.
And it's a very different reaction.
And it's a human interactions, and sometimes errors will occur, but I believe in our system that there are safeguards along the way where we try to capture those errors from proceeding deeper into the system. It starts with your legislation all the way up to the process that we go through the system, as I mentioned. The discretion of the officer, the discretion of the prosecution, and then ultimately the discretion of the judge. There are many times as a prosecutor I felt like I've met every element of my charge, and the judge, in his or her wisdom, decides that she's just not going to agree with me, and that's okay. That's our process too. And so I think that's the beauty and strength of our system. And the fact that we can have these conversations and share where we are, and then try to come up with the best outcome that we can to the best of our ability.
Thank you, Mr. Gill. Most of the concern, I think, probably is stemmed down to this fear, real or otherwise, that there's been an attempt to criminalize our ideological opponents. People that, I mean, frankly, right? People that believe in the Second Amendment are used to it. Obviously don't have criminal intent, but it's an opportunity to stick them. It's an opportunity to criminalize their behavior when that clearly wasn't any of the intent of it. So I appreciate you being here and that commitment that you've shared with us. We have, I think, next, Joe McBride, Salt Lake City Police Association. There we go.
My name is Joe McBride, and I'm the president of the Salt Lake Police Association. I appreciate you allowing me to be here with you and hopefully share this from the perspective of a police officer. I want to acknowledge first off that we understand it's a very serious thing to bring a firearm into the airport. It presents a security risk, and we both agree and understand the need for protocol and to make sure each one of these cases is handled correctly. We further agree that there's probable cause present and that an officer shall enforce that law and take the action necessary. While keeping this at the forefront of our minds, it cannot, under any circumstance, amount to the point where we're going to force a police officer to potentially violate somebody's civil rights. In that process, the officer will become civilly liable, potentially, for those actions that he took. The Constitution obviously grants us rights, everybody in this country, and it's something we have to be very aware of and very conscious of. From the first days of the academy, we're taught how important it is to make sure we're conscious of this stuff in everything that we do and every action that we take. I was informed by multiple officers that the standard practice for some time at the airport has been to cite every person and seized their firearm when it was brought into the screening area in a security checkpoint. When I learned this, even from the approach of criminal negligence, I was still concerned by it. It's a dangerous game to play when you're going to take a blanket approach to enforcing laws with our Constitution in place. Just changing the standard from criminal negligence to reckless still requires careful investigation. It still requires the right line of questioning, the right line of conversation. We've already talked about examples that are in place. For those of us in law enforcement, we all like the gadgets, we all like the backpacks, and a lot of them come with hidden compartments. My wife does not handle firearms. It's not something she's interested in doing. If I had one hidden in a bag, she would have no idea it was in there. So if these situations are happening and the officer cannot determine that a crime occurred through reasonable and articulable facts, they should not be required to take action. We've heard a lot of different views here from the department, from the legal side of things, but from the perspective of an officer, it becomes a little more complicated. It's frustrating to me that I've been told by multiple officers that they've been directed by the department to issue citations and seize firearms in every single one of these cases. Now, we've heard differently, but I've talked with multiple officers, and I have a letter from an officer who's too afraid to come here and speak openly for fear of retaliation that I'll read to you shortly and hopefully clarify the general feeling of the airport officers. I've also been told that statements from the airport administration of if this is the hill you're going to die on, then go ahead, is also concerning to me. This is boiled down to training and experience, right? We've changed the law and we've changed the mental culpability to it. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be taking action on the majority of these cases. What it means is if the officers aren't trained and taught on how these cases should be investigated and applied, then how are they supposed to do this effectively? If the standard has been from the time that they've started is you just issue a citation, and now we're learning that this is potentially outside of the reason this law has changed, and they're having their supervisors tell them, no, you will continue to do this, or they're not clearly communicating how these laws are to be investigated, that puts the officers in a very difficult situation. The department has not issued any official training, no official guidelines. We're 3 months into this, and the only thing that has come out is 5 questions that only some of the officers have received and not all of them have. We're grateful for the actions that are being taken here and for the direction that this is being looked at, because this highlights a concern. I've been a cop for 15 years. 12 of those were on the street investigating these types of cases. 3 as a detective. I took an oath to uphold the Constitution, like every other police officer before me. And to take a blanket approach to any law is wrong. And if they haven't clearly communicated that to their officers, that is a concern to me. There is not a single infraction that I know of in 15 years of law enforcement where we have ever seized someone's property. Furthermore, they talk about the danger of turning the firearm back over to a person. What they didn't tell you is they do that every single day. If someone checks their firearm incorrectly in their checked luggage, they contact that person, they pull them back from screening, they go out to the public area, and they give the bag and the firearm back to this person and tell them you need to package it correctly in your suitcase and recheck your bag. The struggle for me also is the fact that we've heard all of the reasons why we shouldn't bring firearms in there. And I don't discount them, but the needs of the department, the needs of the airport, and the needs of the people involved with this decision process, it doesn't trump the Constitution. And if we're taking someone's firearm because they made a mistake, that's very concerning. Our officers deserve the training that they need to be able to investigate these correctly. And the fact, again, to reiterate, we're 3 months into this and there's been no official training to the officers, highlights another issue. I further heard that the current rumor is now, if this law is finally understood and applied the right way, and this is, again, it's I'm being told that the airport, the decision is, well, they'll just use disorderly conduct as another approach to handle this, and they'll seize the firearm that way. The problems that we're facing here are bigger than I personally believe are bigger than what we're hearing and what we're seeing. The officers of the Salt Lake City Police Department should not be required to arrest someone when they don't believe probable cause is existent. If we're forcing people to make decisions in this type of manner, it's going to lead to further problems and much bigger issues down the road. Because people make mistakes. And the intent was clear. When I first heard about this, I read the House bill and I read the law, and it was pretty clear to me. I've been a cop for 15 years. It's our job to read the law, understand the law, and then try and enforce that to the best of our abilities. So yes, 100% we work on intent. We have to match the elements. We have to understand the law we're enforcing. And enough officers have asked questions with this specific change with only confusion and different direction from the department. Those that serve on the board of the Salt Lake Police Association are deeply committed to upholding the Constitution and enforcing the laws in the way that you have determined, because you've been elected, in the way you've interpreted them and want them applied. Again, I've been a police officer 15 years. I spent a lot of time learning and understanding the laws. We appreciate what you're doing, and I want to take a second to thank you deeply for what you've done with the mental health side of things for our officers. What you don't see on a daily basis is those decisions that has saved the lives of many of my brothers and sisters that struggle on a daily basis. So thank you for what you're doing here. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. It looks like I have one from Representative Romero.
I always like to make a disclosure that I've worked for Salt Lake City for almost 22 years, so want to put it out there so people don't accuse me of anything. So my question for you is, have you, as you know, the union piece of it, have you had these conversations with the administration?
Yes.
Okay. That's what I wanted to know. Because I really feel like, why are we here right now having this conversation? Really feel like this should have been a conversation with the municipal government, and I represent Salt Lake City, so does she. Haven't heard anything from any of your officers.
So to clarify, as far as the airport issue is concerned, I have not spoken with them directly about this, but I have spoken with them about the overlying and underlying issues that come from these types of situations.
So I guess that Mr. Chair, that would be my concern, because I know as someone who, wears many hats, if I have a concern and you're an association, you have your organization, wouldn't that organization bring these specific concerns? Because we're here talking about the airport and you're here talking about the airport. Wouldn't you have these conversations with your administration?
Yes.
And so you haven't had these conversations with the administration specifically regarding the airport?
No, with this one.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, with this one, I had not heard of anything that had taken place until I was contacted.
You answered my question. Thanks.
Very well.
Hang on. I don't need to be short with him. To be clear, we're not here just because of him, right? We're here by popular demand, I'll say.
Well, my question was regarding specifically, Mr. Chair, whether this conversation had happened regarding the airport, because that's why I thought we were talking about this bill.
Yes.
And the current administration.
Sure.
In municipal government, because I find it really hard when we're having conversations when we're leaving out that particular organization, and maybe that could have been resolved if these conversations would have happened there. That's my point.
We understand. That's fine. Thank you. Representative Grecius, go ahead.
Just to comment, to answer the good representative's question, I have been contacted by 9 different officers at the airport division, and I have had dozens of email documents sent to me. These documents do indicate that the Salt Lake City's, they have been part of the conversation. It's been the Salt Lake City prosecutor, the Salt Lake City mayor's office, the Salt Lake County DA, as well as the department and the airport division. They have all been at the table attending these meetings, so they have been involved in these.
Thank you, Representative. Okay. Are there any further questions for the witness? Okay. Thank you for being here today. We know that's difficult, and frankly, a lot of the folks that have reached out to me and others on the committee, they're nervous about it. They're nervous about talking to their bosses about these things because there's a definite lack of trust for whatever reason. And I've had that direct conversation with the city and with Chief in those words. So I don't know what's led to all of that. I don't know why it's at that place, but that exists. And that's what we're responding to today. We're going to hopefully try to remedy that. Again, thank you for being here. Committee discussion. We've had quite a discussion today on this one. I appreciate you sticking it out. We've obviously lost our senators, but we weren't going to take any action that required senators today, so we can sort of do whatever we want. Just to be clear, we do have one other item on the agenda, long-term planning for criminal justice infrastructure, which is fairly important. Would you all like to keep going, or would you like to bump it to St. George? I'm fine to keep going. It's only 4 o'clock. The Senate's doing a thing on the floor, so they had to go. But yes, Representative Burton.
Clarifying question, and I should have asked it when Captain Bennett was at the table, but I think it kind of slipped me. The question that I have is the conversation kind of shifted from did he understand legislative intent to officers having to determine the intent of the person that brought the firearm. And I wanted to just ask, Mr. Chair, was it your understanding that he did not understand legislative intent, or that he did not intend to enforce legislative intent? I'm a little. My feeling
that
was
answer was pretty.
It was
clear.
the latter. My feeling was it was the latter, that he, in his own way, indicated he wasn't going to enforce legislative intent.
Yeah.
Did I get that wrong?
No, that's my interpretation. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, Representative Grecius.
Yeah, just to comment further on that, the department was at the negotiating table when these bills, or when this bill was being worked on during the session. They did weigh in. There were changes made based on Salt Lake County's recommendations. So there was no question as to what the intent was, and as they had a seat at the table, I believe they were fully aware. What has been concerning is we've discussed, okay, what steps do we take as we move forward? Do we remove reckless and make it a very clean cut? It's the misdemeanor or nothing. You know, what are our next steps? And the rumors swirling around that is if we remove that citation altogether, that they're going to jump straight to arresting people for disorderly conduct instead. So my understanding and belief in this matter are that it's not a misunderstanding of intent, but it's a disagreement in policy.
Well, we were all here. So out of the gate, we heard, what if this person, both from the airport administration and then following from Captain Bennett, when PD was still in here, what I heard is that if that person is here at the airport, say here at the airport, with that, then it is by definition reckless. All right, so that ideological understanding is still there. That belief is still there. And if you believe that, then there is no room for discretion. And so there is still a disconnect, I think, in between certainly the legislative intent, which was to maybe not prosecute or cite even everyone that we know didn't intend to do that. So that conversation on intent, I didn't think we would have today, but I'm glad we did, because that came up over and over and over again in this discussion. And we can have that other conversation. Should we explicitly move to negligence or reckless or not? But this is at the heart of it. Representative Gwynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think what you just said speaks to the issue, right? The ideological understanding, the disagreement policy, like we can have those discussions, but at the end of the day, we have an agency that came out vehemently opposed to the policy, and then when the policy was enacted, changed behavior. Like, the optics of that are just awful, I think. And so I agree with the latter, that they just didn't answer the question, or they're not willing to follow the legislative intent, which I think was fairly obvious when we were having this discussion.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, I don't see any further comments or questions. Anybody online I missed or anything? That was one of my favorite things, by the way, seeing Thatcher with the video game headset. That was awesome. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on. Long-term planning is item number 4 on the agenda, and this will be our last. Well, yeah, we're going to make it the last one. I'll give you the school security task force in private, or we'll move that to September. But let's see, we have Sarah here, our policy analyst, who's going to do the presentation, and then Commissioner Anderson is still here. I apologize, Commissioner Anderson. We thought that was going to go a lot quicker. But good to see you, and sitting so patiently. Go ahead, Sarah.
I've got my HDMI plugged in, but it doesn't look like it's showing up. There we go. So again, my name is Sarah Flanagan, policy analyst, and I'm going to be brief here. I just wanted to give a little bit of background information for all of you on this item. When you passed the study item list back in May, it included an item to assess long-term needs for public safety related to growth, including funding needs. And this is a part of that conversation. It's obviously a large conversation, so right now we're going to focus on demographics and a few items with DPS. So when we're thinking about the population growth that we can anticipate in coming years, thought it would be helpful to look back at what our historical population growth has been. So this just shows you the census data from 1980 through 2020, and the fact that Utah's population more than doubled during that time. When we're looking forward for population projections, the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute does a lot of work in this area, and you can check out some of their graphics on their website if you click on the link there, or if you'd like to download the full report that I'll be referring to in the next few slides, you can click on that other link. But they anticipate that in the next 40 years, so 2020 through 2060 is what they looked at, there will be a 66% increase in population, and the number of households in the state are expected to double. One of the very helpful aspects of their work is the county level data that they've looked at. And when we look here, we can see that the 5 counties that are projected to add the most residents are our first-class county and second-class counties. They anticipate in 2060 that Salt Lake County will still be the largest by population, but the one that will grow the most is Washington County, which will increase by 155% according to their projections. And this is a figure from their report that just shows you where they're expecting residents to be added, and Utah County will add the most during that time. One issue for policymakers that I wanted to highlight for you is that they don't think that growth in rural counties is going to be similar to the growth in our urban counties. So what that means practically is that the divide between the urban and rural areas is going to grow instead of decrease. There's even a county, Miller County, that they anticipate will lose residents. So the way that we look at providing resources to rural counties will probably be different than where we will be providing resources in our population centers. And so today, Commissioner Anderson is here to talk to us about two of the long-term needs, peace officers and the pipeline for that, as well as highway safety. And I will bring up his presentation now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee. Great to be with you again. Jess Anderson, serve as the Commissioner of Utah Department of Public Safety. So with this projection and what we've tried to evaluate also is just the demands of what we're going to see on our police force over the next little bit. But part of that's just kind of going off of historical data and what I can share with you today. So if you want to go to the next slide. What I wanted to do is start with kind of a crime in our crime trend in the state of Utah, as well as some other graphics of pulling some things together. But you can see here that really, if you take 2019, which this reflects, if you go back to 2017, but 2019, our lowest year, most recent year in crime stats, even to 2021, this is based on NIBRS, which is coming out of the all verified crime through the FBI that we report to, even though we do have a dashboard through BCI that has our more real-time crime stats, but this is verified as what is actually out there. So you're looking at a 13% difference between 2019 and 2021. Now keep in mind that 2021 is when we saw an increase coming out of 2020 and some of the effects of social unrest as well as COVID. So but a 13% increase in crime. And I will tell you, though, from 33,149 on 2021 of crimes against people, which is violent crime, that would be, we are seeing currently an 18% decrease in violent crime in the state. So this is going to fluctuate and shows the fluctuation. We're staying fairly consistent with overall crime rate. Back and forth just a little bit, but fairly consistent. If you want to go to the next. This shows you where we're at with the status of our police officers all the way back to 2008. And we pull this information from our police officer standards and training, tracking all applications and records and certifications of officers. So as you can see that from a special function officer, very few numbers there, to law enforcement, which is the yellow middle bar, and then over to our correctional officers. Quite simply, from 2008 to 2023, as it comes to officers, we have an 8% increase. We've increased our numbers by 8% from that timeline in 15 years. You want to go to the next? To put that in perspective, we currently in 2021 see about 2.2, almost 2.3 officers per 1,000 people in the state of Utah. So for every 1,000 people, you have 2.3 officers who to that ratio. Now you may say, what is the standard? Well, there is no standard. And quite frankly, you have to be careful with that. But on national average, it's about 2.4 to 2.5 per 1,000 people. However, according to the IACP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and if you were to ask on that, we don't base that on a standard, but yet it's on call volume and workload. So some communities in some states, in some areas, you're going to have higher per capita versus a higher ratio than others. That your crime volume and your workload's less. But on average, state nationwide is about 2.5, and right now in Utah we're at 2.29. You can see that in 2020, 2.49, and the effects of what we went through in 2020 is when we saw several individuals leave the profession. Here's a snapshot of our 911 call volume, what we've seen from 2014 to 2022. That actually, if you put a trend line to that, is actually a 12% increase in 911 calls over that time frame. And that's with a projection of what we just saw Sarah show us with the population increases, that we will continue to see the call volumes of 911 calls and calls for service go up. This just goes to show you that there is a methodology for figuring out staffing. And so with the Utah Highway Patrol, and back in 2018, we went through a staffing process. It's a scientifically best model coming from well proven through our Northwestern Staffing Command, or Northwestern University, that they do a lot in the world of policing and police science. And so there is a methodology that we can go through for all of this. It's gauged on 60% obligated time versus 40% unobligated time, meaning how much are you spending on your calls versus how much do you have free time. And they put together this scientific formula to do that. This just goes to show you that as we've done this, in addition to putting the Highway Patrol, in addition to population and vehicle miles traveled, number of cars on roadway, we can tell you exactly where we should be in our staffing compared to where we're at today. So if you want to go to the next slide, and a lot of information, actually go to the next one. What we want to point out here is that just a lot of information based on the fact, though, over on this far right-hand column is just the percentage of increase from current staff. So if I take what we call sections, which is the second column, section 1 through 14, that represents pretty much our enforcement or our operations throughout the state. I can tell you that in, for instance, section 4, which is Salt Lake County, that we are down where we should be, 27 troopers compared to actual staff of 74. And so you can see the percentages here of that's 35% short in staff compared to where we should be. This is all based upon the modeling or the methodology of this Northwestern Staffing University Staffing Command. And that is pretty much, I guess we could get it. You want us to cover the Bangor? Or stop? We can pause right there. That was a different topic. So,
No,
so
okay.
that concludes, Mr. Chair. If I'll open any questions.
So the short version of all this is bottom line is we're not keeping up with percentage or actual numbers. We haven't for years.
Correct.
Right, like going on decades.
Correct.
Yeah. From the committee standpoint, and I don't see any questions from anybody else, I'm happy to, if anybody has any, there's Representative Gwen, but we had like a sort of a tweak bill this year that helped with some of that funding, right? The one that Senator Harper ran.
Correct.
But that's nowhere near close to standard. And so we've been doing this a little bit like we have. Who's all here? Angela was here, I think, when our Representative Romero, when we passed the bill that removed the safety, right? And then we leveraged that into adding 70-something troopers to handle that. It's such a silly way to do it. It's like how we handle, by the way, I can let this out there. It's exactly how we handle the alcohol licenses. It's absurd. Like there's no logic to it whatsoever, right? Reality is we build a lot of roads and we expect these guys to cover it magically until we have something else they can leverage to add 4 or 5 dozen more troopers to catch up to where we should have been in 1989. It's not going to work. Like they can't enforce. They don't have the opportunity to determine intent because they're not even there. So I would love to, for those of us that are here still, I would love to see us work towards a permanent long-term structural fix. Meaning that if we're going to build 20 miles, we ought to understand how many troopers that takes to enforce. And that should just be built into the structure, just like the maintenance is, because that's maintenance, right? If we're going to do a 100-mile new Mountain West corridor, well, how many troopers does it take to police it? Or do we not expect there to be speed limits there? Or is that just like the cool new street racing venue? Because that's sort of what we've done. We've tried to pass these bills around street racing, but a lot of that's just, the answer is more enforcement if we're not going to do it. We just don't have the bandwidth to do it, let alone with DUIs and all the drug issues we're facing right now that really are the things I want them to be worried about. So, Representative Gwynn, there's my little vent session on the topic. Thank you for being here, Commissioner. I have Representative Gwynn. Go ahead.
I love your perfect and utopian world.
Yeah, it's nice. Nobody lives there, but it's nice.
Commissioner, you probably don't have this, Commissioner. I was just thinking about this as I'm looking at your presentation. We're talking about the supply problem, right? So post is the gate valve. So the last numbers I looked at, and I don't remember how old they were, just a couple years, I believe it was when Major Stevenson was there, but the enrollment since 2011, academy enrollment has gone down 30% overall, right? And it's my understanding that the law enforcement agencies are now, you have very few cadets that are willing to pay themselves to put themselves through the satellite academies, through the universities. So I'm just wondering if you can speak to, and if you can't, if you can collect the data, I would actually like to see the enrollment trends of the academy over the last decade. And then from what I understand too, according to a university study that was done by UVU in 2017, their study indicated, and I'm using their words, these are not my words, but the candidates are of, quote, diminished quality.
Yeah.
So you have 30% fewer people coming in since 2011. I want to know if that trend is still the same, has gone down or up. And I'd be interested to see what's happening with test scores. And then I'd also like to see what's happening with law enforcement sponsorship as opposed to self-sponsorship. I think all of that collectively can tell us a story. And again, the data that I have is a couple years old. I'm certain it's changed over the last few years, but I'd be curious as to how much.
Yeah, thank you, Representative. I can pull all that data and we can be prepared to present on that. I can tell you though that from where we were then, we actually are swinging back in the positive here. And so our classes, we are most of the time at capacity or near capacity of keeping post completely busy, meaning the classrooms are full. We have the rotation going of multiple classes at once. So it seems like we've actually are swinging on the back into the positive on that, and we have for the last year. We're seeing more interest in testing. At least we at the Highway Patrol, I can tell you that we have an open recruitment right now. We have 300 applicants. We haven't seen that kind of number in a long time. Now, of that 300 applicants, though, we'll probably get 75 to 100 maybe to show up, maybe. And of that number, so our process is that it takes us 50 applicants usually to find one quality candidate. So
1.5's good, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. But we're positive. We're hopeful that actually that number is starting to be affected, coming back down to quality candidates, meaning those who actually can qualify and get through a background and pass the tests and everything else that goes with it. And so, but I do know, talking to the post and post staff, is that they are busy and in keeping those classes at capacity now. Now, what used to be a several month wait period to get a cadet into a class is certainly we don't see quite that wait. And so, yeah, we can accommodate and get people in classes a little quicker. Which is good, but it's staying at capacity. But we can pull all those numbers for you. Our satellite academies, though, as well, are busy. It is interesting, and it will be interesting to see how many of those are getting hired coming out of a self-sponsor type of environment. Because a lot of times you do see that's I was a self-sponsor coming through myself. but nowadays it's a lot of those, are they employable? It's the question.
Thank you.
Yep.
By the way, I was out in a ride along recently, with one of your guys, talking to him about the new guys that have come in over the last year, how long they're lasting. Right, and it's everything from 3 months to, they hope longer term, but guys that have been on for a year or two, sometimes even just don't make it. So what is after you go through that entire process, what's your retention rate look like?
So retention wise, we, on an average year, we will, just through attrition, we'll absorb about 35 positions, either through retirement or through those that cut out early.
Mm-hmm.
And so on average, we always know that we're going to be, just starting the year, we're at 35.
Yeah.
So,
well, we've had that conversation. Yeah, I figured Representative Gwynn wanted to say something. I'm going to go to Representative Romero. She's been waiting real quick. Go ahead, Representative.
I guess you and I are the old timers on this committee and been working with the commissioner for a long time. And I just encourage my colleagues that are probably checking their phones right now because all their heads are down, that when it comes to the appropriation piece of this, and don't get me wrong, law enforcement is very important to me and a lot of the work I sponsor. And so I'm there with Representative Wilcox on these issues. Just really help us encourage your colleagues, and I always work on mine about making sure we have the adequate funding to be able to do what we need to do for the commissioner and what DPS just does in general. And so because we ask and it gets cut, and so we need your help in making sure that our leadership teams prioritize that funding, because again, we've seen this in corrections and we're seeing it still in corrections, and we definitely need to invest more. So that was my plug.
Thank you, Representative. And I think, that's just back to, we got to fix the structure instead of this weird way we've been doing it forever. Thank you, Representative Matt.
Yeah, so to the commissioner's point, right? So you have, again, we're trying to fill gaps that are created by attrition, and we're still not catching up to the funded vacancies that we haven't filled yet, right? And that's going to take years. It was going to be several years before, when I say several, it's going to be at least a few years before Department of Corrections alone, all things being equal and moving along smoothly, before they could churn out enough candidates to get all their funded vacancies filled, not using attrition as one of those variables. Now, to the earlier question about what retention looks like, the last URS data that we looked like, they did a trend line, and it suggested that 50% of those hired after 2011 are or will be gone before they ever hit year 9.
Right.
They're not even making it halfway. So for everyone,
halfway to the old standard.
Halfway to the old standard.
Yeah.
Right. And so department heads, administrators, DPS, they're going to have to budget 2 FTEs for every one they keep to year 9.
Mm-hmm.
That's not good math. Just throwing that out there. Thanks.
Well, it's a good thing we have General Burton here with all the money. So appreciate that. Oh, yeah, you might want to say something.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. We appreciate you, Commissioner, and what you do and your team every single day, and I appreciate Representative Romero's comments about that. I think we all can come together on that. The challenge we face is we wish that money could solve every problem, but frankly, when you talk about recruiting police officers, we can get after about 24% of high school seniors, and that the folks fishing in that pond are military, law enforcement, airlines, you name it, about 24% of that population. And then, as has been so aptly pointed out, they don't stay, and that's a societal challenge that we face. And I wish I could solve that in 10 minutes. We're working on it with corrections, but it is a tough nut. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
May I just respond? Can I make a comment too? Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just let me, I certainly would be remiss if I didn't express our gratitude for all the help and the consideration and everything that you have done along these lines and are doing and are willing to do of a profession that we try to hold up at the highest level and highest standard of professionalism because of what we owe to society and what society deserves of the very best out there to protect them and make sure things are being done correctly. But we recognize from the compensation packages, from the scholarships that have been set up, from the treatment and mental health. And I mean, the list has gone on and on and on over the last 5 years that I've been as a commissioner is just incredible. So your level of trust given back into the profession, your support is why all of a sudden too, we're starting to see the trending numbers going back up, at least in our recruitment and our opportunities to try to reinvest in this with good people. So I certainly don't want to be remiss without telling you thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I don't see any further questions. We appreciate you being here as always. And again, sorry for taking up your entire day.
That's okay. We were planning on it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I don't see anything else. It's just a reminder to everybody that our next hearing together, next time together will be different. Don't come here. It'll be in St. George. So make sure and watch all of that. Meanwhile, we're getting to the part of the session or the interim year, part of the year, where we're ready to start coalescing around some of these ideas, things that we need to do. So obviously there'll be some legislation, certainly some clarifying language, probably from 461 today, for example. There's so many pieces of that that were hard, but at the very least, we want to make sure that we're not leaving as much open to the understanding of legislative intent. So we need to remove some of those barriers. But anything that you're thinking of, anything that you are going to want to work on as a committee, it's a good time to have those conversations now. So let's have them. Let's take advantage of that time that we have before it gets hot and heavy. Any questions? Anything else from anyone? Motion to adjourn, best one. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.